The heartland of Tamriel pulses with traditions as ancient as the White Gold Tower itself, where ceremonies and customs have shaped the empire's identity for millennia. Cyrodiil's rich tapestry of ritual and observance reflects both its role as the continent's political center and its unique position as the meeting ground between divine mandate and mortal ambition. The most sacred of all imperial ceremonies remains the lighting of the dragon fires, a ritual that binds the empire's legitimacy to divine covenant. Within the Temple of the One, located in the heart of the imperial city's temple district, the Amulet of Kings serves as the focal point for this most crucial of observances. The ceremony itself requires the presence of a dragon-born emperor, for only one bearing the dragon blood can kindle the sacred flames that maintain the barriers between Mundus and oblivion. The ritual chamber beneath the temple houses an ancient brazier carved from meteoric stone, its surface inscribed with Aelid runes that predate even the Alessian rebellion. When the emperor approaches this altar, wearing the Amulet of Kings around his neck, the very air seems to thicken with anticipation. The assembled witnesses, high-ranking members of the Elder Council, the potentate if one serves, and representatives from each of the 9 divine priesthoods, maintain absolute silence as the emperor extends his hands toward the cold brazier. The lighting itself manifests as more than mere flame. Witnesses describe a brilliant golden fire that erupts from the brazier's center, casting dancing shadows that seem to move independently of the flame's motion. The fire burns without fuel, sustained entirely by the covenant between Akatosh and the dragon-born line. As the flames take hold, a subtle but unmistakable change occurs throughout the imperial city. The White Gold Tower's crystalline structure resonates with a barely audible hum, and sensitive individuals report feeling a strengthening of the metaphysical barriers that separate the mortal realm from the planes of oblivion. This ceremony traditionally occurs immediately following an emperor's coronation, but historical records indicate emergency lightings during times of particular supernatural threat. The Third Era saw several such instances, particularly during the opening years when Daedric incursions tested the Empire's magical defenses. The flames, once lit, burn continuously until the Emperor's death, at which point they extinguish automatically, regardless of distance or circumstance. The Imperial Legion maintains its own elaborate network of traditions, many dating back to the earliest days of Alessia's rebellion against the Aelids. The Oath of Service represents perhaps the most solemn of these customs, administered to every recruit regardless of their provincial origin. The ceremony takes place in Legion barracks across the Empire, but the words remain identical from Skyrim to elsewhere. New recruits stand in formation before a Legion standard, typically the red diamond banner of their particular cohort, while a centurion or higher-ranking officer administers the oath. The recruits place their right hands over their hearts and recite the binding words that commit them to serve the Empire above all other loyalties, including family, province, and personal ambition. The oath specifically mentions defense of the Emperor, protection of imperial citizens, and maintenance of the Pax Imperialis that has brought stability to Tamriel. Following the oath, each new legionnaire receives their standard issue equipment in a formal presentation ceremony. The centurion presents each item individually: the iron sword, the rectangular shield bearing the legion's insignia, the segmented armor that has become synonymous with imperial military might. This equipment presentation serves both practical and symbolic purposes, as each piece represents the recruit's transformation from civilian to soldier of the Empire. Military honors within the Legion follow strict hierarchical protocols developed over centuries of campaign experience. The Corona Civica, a crown woven from oak leaves, recognizes legionnaires who save the lives of fellow citizens during combat. The Torque, a twisted metal necklace, honors those who demonstrate exceptional bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. The most prestigious decoration, the Golden Dragon, is reserved for actions that directly preserve imperial territory or prevent significant loss of life among civilian populations. The ceremonial passing of standards between legions occurs during major redeployments or when veteran units transfer their honors to newly formed cohorts. These ceremonies typically take place in the presence of high-ranking military officials and often include representatives from the Elder Council. The outgoing Legion's standard bearer approaches the incoming unit's formation, carrying the banner that has accompanied their cohort through numerous campaigns. The transfer itself involves a formal recitation of the standard's history, including major battles, distinguished service records, and the names of fallen heroes who died defending it. The receiving Legion's new standard bearer accepts the banner with both hands while kneeling, then rises to present it to their assembled troops. This moment often proves emotionally charged, as veterans witness the continuation of their unit's legacy, while new soldiers accept the weight of inherited honor and responsibility. Imperial festivals punctuate the calendar year with celebrations that reinforce both religious devotion and civic unity. The New Life Festival, occurring during the final days of Evening Star and the opening of Morning Star, represents the most widely observed of these celebrations. Unlike provincial festivals that often focus on local deities or cultural heroes, the New Life Festival emphasizes renewal and the cyclical nature of time itself. Preparations begin weeks in advance as Imperial citizens clean their homes, settle outstanding debts, and prepare special foods associated with the celebration. The festival's central tradition involves the lighting of bonfires in public squares throughout Cyrodiil, with each community contributing fuel gathered from their surrounding lands. These fires burn continuously for the festival's duration, and citizens take turns maintaining them as a communal responsibility. The festival's religious aspects center on prayers offered to all 9 divines simultaneously, acknowledging their collective role in maintaining the cosmic order. Priests from different temples collaborate to conduct joint ceremonies, setting aside theological differences in favor of unified worship. These multi-denominational services feature readings from various religious texts, communal singing of ancient hymns, and the sharing of blessed bread among all participants regardless of their usual religious affiliations. Gift-giving during the New Life Festival follows specific customs that reinforce social bonds and community solidarity. Citizens exchange simple, handmade items rather than expensive purchased goods, emphasizing personal effort over material wealth. Common gifts include carved wooden figurines, woven cloth items, preserved foods, and small tools crafted by local artisans. The exchange occurs on the festival's final day, with families and neighbors gathering in homes to share meals and present their offerings. Celebrations honoring individual members of the 9 divines occur throughout the year, each following distinctive ritual patterns developed by their respective priesthoods, but modified to reflect imperial sensibilities. The Festival of Akatosh, held during the height of summer, features elaborate processions through major cities, where participants carry banners depicting the dragon symbol of the Divine of Time. These processions follow predetermined routes that connect temples, government buildings, and historical sites significant to imperial history. Participants in Akatosh's festival wear clothing in shades of gold and red, colors associated with the divine's dominion over time and dragons. The procession moves at a deliberately measured pace, with periodic stops for prayers and the reading of historical passages that demonstrate Akatosh's influence on imperial destiny. Musicians accompany the procession with drums and horns, playing rhythmic patterns that supposedly echo the heartbeat of time itself. The cultural division between Nibnese mystical practices and Colovian martial traditions profoundly influences how different regions of Cyrodiil observe religious ceremonies and seasonal celebrations. The Nibnese, concentrated in the eastern portions of the province around the imperial city, incorporate elaborate magical elements into their observances. Their festivals feature complex ritual magic, divination ceremonies, and the creation of temporary enchantments that enhance the spiritual atmosphere of their celebrations. Nibnese religious practices often involve the use of ceremonial masks carved to represent various aspects of the 9 divines, with different masks worn during different portions of extended rituals. These masks, crafted from rare woods and decorated with precious metals and gems, are considered sacred objects that channel divine essence during ceremonial use. The creation of new masks requires months of preparation, including the blessing of materials, purification of craftsmen, and the performance of protective rituals to prevent malevolent magical interference. Their seasonal celebrations incorporate astronomical observations, with ceremonies timed to coincide with specific celestial events such as conjunctions, eclipses, and the appearance of particular constellations. Nibnese communities maintain detailed calendars that track these astronomical phenomena, and their festival dates often shift slightly from year to year to maintain proper celestial alignment. Colovian traditions, by contrast, emphasize martial prowess, physical endurance, and practical demonstrations of skill and courage. Their religious observances feature competitive elements such as wrestling matches, archery contests, and displays of swordsmanship that honor the warrior aspects of the nine divines. These competitions serve both entertainment and religious purposes, as participants view their physical achievements as offerings to the divine powers they seek to honor. Colovian seasonal celebrations often revolve around activities directly connected to their agricultural and military heritage. Harvest festivals feature competitions in crop gathering, livestock judging, and the preparation of traditional foods using techniques passed down through generations. Military-themed celebrations include mock battles, formation drills performed by local militias, and ceremonies honoring veterans of imperial service. The differences between these regional approaches create fascinating variations in how supposedly uniform imperial festivals are actually observed across Cyrodiil. The New Life Festival, while maintaining its core elements of renewal and community bonding, takes on distinctly different characteristics in Nibnese and Colovian communities. Nibnese celebrations feature elaborate light displays created through magical means, with colored flames and floating illuminations that transform entire neighborhoods into ethereal landscapes. Their gift exchanges often include enchanted items, magical components, and books containing esoteric knowledge. Colovian New Life celebrations emphasize physical activities and practical skills, with communities organizing contests in woodcutting, metalworking, and other crafts essential to daily life. Their gift exchanges focus on tools, weapons, and items that demonstrate the giver's practical abilities rather than magical knowledge or artistic sophistication. The frigid peaks of Skyrim harbor traditions as enduring as the ancient stones of Windhelm, where Nordic customs have weathered the storms of conquest, dragon fire, and civil strife for thousands of years. These practices, forged in the crucible of Skyrim's unforgiving climate and tempered by generations of conflict, reflect the fundamental Nordic values of honor, strength, and reverence for the natural and supernatural forces that shape their harsh homeland. High atop the throat of the world, where the wind cuts through stone and the air grows thin enough to challenge even the hardiest Nord, the Greybeards maintain the most sacred of all Nordic traditions, the preservation and practice of the Thu'um. Their monastery of High Hrothgar, constructed from massive granite blocks that seem to grow from the mountain itself, serves as the primary repository of knowledge concerning the voice and its proper application according to the way of the voice philosophy. The Greybeards' daily routine begins before dawn with meditation sessions conducted in the monastery's central chamber, a circular room whose walls bear carved inscriptions in the dragon language that chronicle the history of the voice and its masters. These meditation practices require absolute silence except for the controlled use of the Thu'um itself, as the monks believe that unnecessary speech dilutes the power and purity of their vocal abilities. Each Greybeard spends hours in contemplative silence, focusing their minds on the philosophical principles that govern the ethical use of the voice. The way of the voice philosophy, established by Jorgen Windcaller following his defeat at Red Mountain, fundamentally transformed how the Thu'um is approached and practiced. Rather than viewing the voice as a weapon of war, as their ancestors did, the Greybeards treat it as a form of worship and spiritual discipline. They believe that the Thu'um should only be used for the glory of Kynareth and the protection of the innocent, never for personal gain or aggressive conquest. This philosophical shift required the development of new training methods that emphasize restraint, wisdom, and spiritual growth, alongside the cultivation of vocal power. Prospective students who make the treacherous journey to High Hrothgar undergo years of preparation before they are permitted to learn even the most basic applications of the Thu'um. The initial training focuses entirely on meditation, breathing exercises, and the study of ancient texts that explain the relationship between the voice and the natural world. Students must demonstrate complete mastery of their emotions and desires before progressing to actual vocal training, as the Greybeards believe that an undisciplined mind cannot safely wield the power of the voice. The monastery's library contains scrolls and stone tablets that document centuries of accumulated knowledge about the Thu'um, including detailed descriptions of various applications and their appropriate uses. These texts, written in a mixture of Nordic runes and dragon script, require years of study to fully comprehend. The Greybeards maintain strict control over access to these materials, as they contain information that could be catastrophically dangerous if misused by those lacking proper philosophical grounding. When a student finally begins vocal training, the process follows carefully structured stages designed to build power gradually while reinforcing the ethical constraints of the way of the voice. Initial exercises involve simple breathing techniques and the production of basic sounds that help develop the necessary muscular control and lung capacity. Students practice these fundamental skills for months before attempting to produce any actual Thu'um effects, as premature attempts can result in serious injury or loss of vocal ability. The Greybeards' approach to teaching the Thu'um emphasizes understanding over raw power, requiring students to comprehend the philosophical implications of each technique before learning its practical application. They believe that the voice derives its power from the student's spiritual connection to the natural world and their commitment to using that power responsibly. This approach produces Thu'um practitioners who are generally less powerful than the ancient Nordic warriors who used the voice in battle, but whose abilities are more stable and controlled. Nordic funeral traditions reflect the culture's complex relationship with death, honor, and the afterlife realm of Sovngarde. These customs vary significantly based on the deceased's social status, manner of death, and the resources available to their surviving family members, but all share common elements that emphasize the continuation of the individual's legacy and their preparation for whatever awaits beyond death. The most elaborate Nordic funeral rites involve the construction of funeral ships, massive wooden vessels designed specifically for cremation ceremonies. These ships, built by specialized craftsmen who inherit their techniques through family lines, incorporate symbolic elements that represent the deceased's life achievements and social position. The ship's prow typically features carved dragon heads or other protective symbols intended to guide the deceased through the dangers of the afterlife journey. Construction of a funeral ship begins immediately upon the death of a prominent individual, as the craftsmanship required can take several weeks to complete properly. The ship's hull is built from carefully selected timber, with different wood types chosen for their symbolic significance. Oak represents strength and endurance, pine symbolizes eternal life, and birch signifies new beginnings and purification. The craftsmen work without payment, viewing their contribution as a sacred duty that honors both the deceased and their own ancestors who practice the same traditions. The deceased's personal possessions are arranged within the ship according to specific patterns that reflect their role in life and their anticipated needs in the afterlife. Warriors receive their weapons and armor, arranged as if they were preparing for battle. Craftsmen are buried with their tools and examples of their finest work. Wealthy individuals may be interred with jewelry, precious metals, and other valuable items that demonstrate their success in life. These grave goods serve both practical and symbolic purposes, as Nords believe that the deceased will need these items in Sovngarde, while also displaying their earthly achievements to the living. The actual ship burning ceremony occurs at sunset, with the deceased's family and friends gathering on the shoreline to witness the final farewell. The ship is pushed into the water and set ablaze using arrows tipped with burning pitch, creating a spectacular display as the flames consume the vessel and its contents. The fire is intended to release the deceased's spirit from their physical form and provide the energy necessary for their journey to Sovngarde. Witnesses maintain silence during the burning, believing that spoken words might interfere with the spirit's departure. For Nords of lesser means or those who die far from suitable waterways, burial in constructed barrows provides an alternative that maintains the essential elements of Nordic funeral tradition. These earthen mounds, built over stone-lined burial chambers, require significant community effort to construct properly. The entire process, from excavation to final covering, involves dozens of individuals who contribute their labor as a form of respect for the deceased and support for the grieving family. Barrow construction follows ancient patterns that incorporate both practical and mystical considerations. The burial chamber itself is oriented to face specific cardinal directions based on the deceased's birth date and manner of death, with warriors typically facing east toward the rising sun and craftsmen facing north toward the pole star. The chamber walls are lined with fitted stones that create a weatherproof environment for the deceased and their grave goods. The selection and placement of grave goods within barrows follows complex protocols that reflect the deceased's social relationships and expected role in the afterlife. Family weapons, particularly those with distinguished combat histories, are positioned within easy reach of the deceased's hands. Personal jewelry and precious items are arranged around the body in patterns that supposedly provide protection during the journey to Sovngarde. Food offerings, including mead, bread, and preserved meats, are placed in ceramic vessels that will sustain the deceased during their travels. Nordic beliefs about Sovngarde profoundly influence both funeral practices and daily behavior, as the prospect of earning a place in this warrior's paradise motivates many of the culture's most distinctive characteristics. Sovngarde is conceived as a vast hall where honored dead feast eternally with the heroes of Nordic history, engaging in glorious combat during the day and celebrating their victories each evening. This vision of the afterlife emphasizes the importance of dying with honor, preferably in battle, and living according to the warrior code that values courage, loyalty, and strength above all other virtues. The criteria for admission to Sovngarde, as understood by Nordic tradition, extend beyond simple death in combat to include the manner of one's life and the legacy left behind. Individuals who demonstrate exceptional courage, protect the innocent, honor their ancestors, and maintain their word regardless of personal cost are considered worthy of Sovngarde regardless of how they die. Conversely, those who betray their oaths, flee from battle, or act with cowardice may be denied entry even if they die with weapons in their hands. These beliefs create a cultural framework that encourages Nords to seek out dangerous challenges and face them with determination rather than seeking safety or comfort. The prospect of earning a place among the honored dead provides motivation for behavior that might otherwise seem recklessly dangerous, as the temporary risks of mortal life pale in comparison to the eternal rewards of Sovngarde. This worldview helps explain the Nordic tendency toward exploration, military service, and the acceptance of dangerous occupations such as mining, hunting, and mercenary work. The Companions of Whiterun represent perhaps the most distinctive and influential Nordic tradition, maintaining customs that blend ancient warrior practices with mystical elements that set them apart from ordinary military organizations. Their mead hall, Jorvaskr, serves as both headquarters and ceremonial center for traditions that date back to the original 500 companions who followed Iskramor to Sky Rim during the return. The companions' initiation process begins with a period of observation during which prospective members demonstrate their combat skills, moral character, and commitment to the organization's values. Unlike formal military units that accept recruits based primarily on physical ability, the companions evaluate candidates holistically, considering their potential for growth, their treatment of others, and their motivation for seeking membership. This evaluation period can last for months, during which candidates live and train alongside existing members while being assessed for their suitability. The formal initiation ceremony takes place within Jorvaskr's main hall, with all available companions present to witness the candidate's acceptance into their ranks. The ceremony begins with the recitation of the companion's history, starting with Iskramor's arrival in Sky Rim and continuing through the major events that shaped the organization's development. This historical recitation serves both educational and ceremonial purposes, ensuring that new members understand their place within a tradition that spans thousands of years. The candidate's formal oath of membership involves pledges of loyalty to their shield siblings, commitment to protecting the innocent, and dedication to maintaining the companion's reputation for honor and martial excellence. Unlike military oaths that emphasize obedience to superior officers, the companion's oath creates bonds of mutual responsibility and respect among equals who happen to have different levels of experience and authority. This egalitarian approach reflects the Nordic cultural emphasis on personal honor and individual worth rather than rigid hierarchical structures. Following the oath, the new companion receives a silver ring bearing the organization's symbol and participates in a ceremonial mead-sharing ritual that formally integrates them into the group's social structure. The mead used in this ceremony is specially prepared using ancient recipes that incorporate honey from specific regions of Sky Rim and herbs that supposedly enhance courage and wisdom. Each member of the companions present takes a drink from the ceremonial horn and passes it to the next person, with the new initiate drinking last to symbolize their acceptance into the established community. The circle, representing the companion's inner leadership, maintains additional traditions that involve the lycanthropic heritage that has shaped the organization for centuries. The werewolf bloodline, introduced through Terfig and his followers, created a dual nature within the companions that requires careful management and specific rituals to control. Members of the circle undergo transformation ceremonies that bind them to the wolf spirit while maintaining their human consciousness and moral judgment. The lycanthropic transformation process involves consuming a mixture of wolf blood and specific herbs during a ritual conducted in the depths beneath Jorvaskr. This ceremony, known only to circle members, requires the participation of existing werewolves who guide the initiate through the dangerous process of accepting the beast blood. The transformation itself is intensely painful and potentially fatal, as the initiate's body and spirit must adapt to accommodate the wolf essence without losing their human identity. Circle members who successfully complete the transformation gain enhanced physical abilities, improved healing, and the ability to assume wolf form at will. However, they also accept the burden of managing their predatory instincts and the responsibility of protecting the secret of their lycanthropic nature from the general population. The circle maintains strict protocols for when and how members may use their wolf abilities, emphasizing that these powers should serve the companion's mission rather than personal desires. The management of the lycanthropic bloodline requires ongoing rituals and practices that help circle members maintain control over their wolf nature. These include regular hunts in the wilderness around Whiterun, meditation exercises that strengthen mental discipline, and the consumption of specific herbs that supposedly calm the beast spirit. Circle members also participate in group ceremonies during certain lunar phases, when the pull of the wolf is strongest and collective support is most necessary. Skyrim's harsh climate and short growing seasons have shaped seasonal celebrations that reflect the constant struggle between survival and the forces of nature. These festivals serve both practical and spiritual purposes, marking important transitions in the agricultural and hunting cycles, while providing opportunities for communities to come together during the long, dark winter months. The Harvest Festival, typically held during the final weeks of last seed, represents the most crucial celebration in the Nordic calendar. This festival marks the completion of the grain harvest and the beginning of preparations for winter, making it a time of both celebration and serious planning. Communities throughout Skyrim organize elaborate feasts that showcase the year's agricultural success, while also serving as opportunities to distribute surplus food to families who may struggle during the coming winter months. Preparation for the Harvest Festival begins weeks in advance, with families contributing their finest produce, preserved meats, and specially brewed ales to communal feasts that can feed entire villages. The festival's central event involves the construction of massive bonfires using the stalks and chaff left over from the grain harvest, creating towering infernos that can be seen for miles across the tundra. These fires serve both practical and symbolic purposes, providing warmth and light during the increasingly cold evenings, while representing the community's defiance of the approaching winter. Traditional Harvest Festival activities include competitions in various skills essential to survival in Skyrim's climate. Archery contests test hunting abilities that will be crucial during the winter months when game becomes scarce. Axe-throwing competitions demonstrate the wood-cutting skills necessary for maintaining adequate fuel supplies. Contests in food preservation, including smoking, salting, and fermentation techniques, showcase the knowledge that can mean the difference between survival and starvation during harsh winters. The festival's religious aspects focus on prayers to Kynareth for favorable weather and to Akatosh for the passage of time that brings the return of spring. These ceremonies typically involve the blessing of seed grain that will be planted the following year, with priests or village elders performing rituals intended to ensure the continued fertility of the land. The blessed grain is stored in special containers and distributed to farming families during the spring planting season. Winter celebrations in Skyrim emphasize community solidarity and the sharing of resources during the most challenging months of the year. The Feast of the Dead, held during the darkest days of Evening Star, honors ancestors and fallen heroes while providing an opportunity for families to gather and share stories that preserve Nordic cultural heritage. This celebration involves elaborate meals prepared using preserved foods from the harvest, with each family contributing dishes that represent their particular traditions and regional specialties. The ash-laden winds of Morrowind carry whispers of traditions that predate the rise of man, where the complex web of Dunmer society weaves together divine worship, ancestral reverence, and political intrigue in patterns as intricate as the spider silk that adorns House Telvanni towers. These customs, forged in the shadow of Red Mountain and tempered by centuries of isolation from imperial influence, reflect a culture that views the boundaries between life, death, and divinity as fluid concepts requiring constant negotiation and careful observance. The Tribunal Temple's hierarchical structure encompasses multiple tiers of religious authority, each with distinct responsibilities and ceremonial obligations that maintain the complex relationship between the living gods and their mortal followers. At the apex of this structure stand the archcanons, high-ranking priests who serve as direct intermediaries between the tribunal and the temple's vast network of shrines, monasteries, and local temples scattered throughout Morrowind's harsh landscape. Archcanons undergo decades of preparation before assuming their positions, beginning their religious education as children in temple schools, where they learn the fundamental doctrines of tribunal worship alongside practical skills such as reading ancient Dunmer script, basic alchemical preparation, and the proper performance of daily rituals. These early years emphasize memorization of sacred texts, particularly the detailed accounts of the tribunal's ascension to godhood and their ongoing protection of the Dunmer people from external threats and spiritual corruption. The temple's middle ranks consist of ordinators, warrior priests who combine martial training with religious devotion to serve as both protectors of temple property and enforcers of religious law. These individuals wear distinctive golden masks that conceal their identities, symbolizing their transformation from individual Dunmer into instruments of divine will. The masks themselves are crafted according to ancient patterns that supposedly channel the protective power of the tribunal, with different designs indicating the wearer's specific role within the ordinator hierarchy. Ordinator training facilities, located in fortified compounds near major temple complexes, combine intensive physical conditioning with rigorous theological education. Recruits spend years mastering various weapon forms, particularly the use of traditional Dunmer weapons such as the chitin spear and the curved saber favored by house warriors. Simultaneously, they study temple law, learning to interpret religious doctrine and apply it to practical situations they may encounter while serving in their communities. The daily routine within ordinator training compounds begins before dawn with meditation sessions conducted in complete darkness, intended to develop the mental discipline necessary for maintaining religious focus while engaged in combat. These meditations involve the recitation of prayers to each member of the tribunal in sequence, with specific emphasis on Vivek's teachings about the balance between opposing forces and the necessity of conflict in achieving spiritual growth. Lower temple ranks include the curates and priests who manage day-to-day religious activities in local communities throughout Morrowind. These individuals serve as the primary point of contact between ordinary Dunmer and the temple hierarchy, conducting routine ceremonies, maintaining shrine facilities, and providing guidance on religious matters that affect daily life. Their training focuses heavily on practical applications of tribunal doctrine, including the proper blessing of crops, the performance of healing rituals, and the identification of signs that might indicate Daedric influence or other spiritual threats. The temple's approach to daily worship emphasizes regular, structured observances that reinforce the tribunal's ongoing presence in mortal affairs. Each day begins with the morning devotion, a ceremony performed at sunrise in temple courtyards throughout Morrowind. Participants gather around central braziers where specially prepared incense burns continuously, creating aromatic smoke that supposedly carries prayers directly to the living gods. The incense itself combines traditional ingredients such as ash yam flowers and marshmallow with rarer components like powdered ebony and small amounts of volcanic ash from Red Mountain slopes. The morning devotion follows a prescribed sequence that honors each member of the tribunal individually before acknowledging their collective protection of the Dunmer people. Participants begin by facing east toward the rising sun while reciting prayers to Almelixia, the healing mother, asking for her protection of family members and her blessing on the day's activities. The ceremony then shifts to face south toward Mournhold while honoring Sotha Sil, the clockwork god, with prayers for wisdom in decision-making and success in craftsmanship or scholarly pursuits. The final portion of the morning devotion faces west toward Vivek City while addressing prayers to Vivek, the warrior poet, seeking guidance in matters of conflict resolution and spiritual balance. This section of the ceremony often includes personal petitions from individual participants who may request divine intervention in specific problems or express gratitude for recent blessings. The entire ceremony concludes with a collective recitation that acknowledges the tribunal's role in protecting Morrowind from the machinations of the Daedra and other external threats. Evening observances follow a similar pattern, but emphasize reflection on the day's events and preparation for the spiritual challenges that darkness might bring. The evening reflection ceremony occurs at sunset in temple halls, illuminated by carefully arranged candles that create specific patterns of light and shadow. These lighting arrangements supposedly mirror the cosmic balance that the tribunal maintains between order and chaos, with the interplay of illumination and darkness representing the ongoing struggle between divine protection and malevolent forces. Pilgrimage traditions within the tribunal temple require devotees to visit specific sacred sites throughout Morrowind, following routes that connect locations significant to the living gods' mortal lives and their ascension to divinity. The most important of these pilgrimages involves the 7 Graces of Vivek, a journey that takes pilgrims to 7 shrines located within and around Vivek City, each commemorating a different aspect of the warrior poet's divine nature and teachings. The pilgrimage begins at the Shrine of Daring, located in the Foreign Quarters Plaza, where pilgrims offer prayers for courage in facing life's challenges, while leaving small offerings of locally crafted items or personal possessions that represent their commitment to spiritual growth. The shrine itself consists of a carved stone altar surrounded by smaller pedestals where pilgrims place their offerings, creating a constantly changing display of devotional items that reflects the diverse backgrounds and needs of Vivek's worshippers. From the Shrine of Daring, pilgrims proceed to the Shrine of Generosity in the Lalu Quarter, where the emphasis shifts to charitable giving and community support. This location requires pilgrims to make substantial donations to temple-sponsored programs that assist the poor, elderly, or disabled members of Dunmer society. The donations may take the form of gold, food, crafted goods, or personal service, with the temple maintaining detailed records of contributions to ensure that resources reach those most in need. The remaining shrines of the 7 Graces pilgrimage each focus on different virtues that Vivek's teachings emphasize as essential for spiritual development. The Shrine of Courtesy, located in the Telvanni Quarter, requires pilgrims to spend time serving other visitors, helping with basic needs such as directions, food, or temporary shelter. The Shrine of Justice, found in the Redoran Quarter, involves meditation on moral principles and often includes participation in community dispute resolution processes overseen by temple authorities. The Shrine of Valor, positioned near the city's military facilities, challenges pilgrims to demonstrate physical or moral courage through various tests that may include combat training, dangerous climbs up the city's towering structures, or confronting personal fears in controlled environments. The Shrine of Pride requires pilgrims to create something that demonstrates their skills and talents, whether through craftsmanship, artistic expression, or scholarly achievement, with the finished work becoming a permanent offering to Vivek. The pilgrimage concludes at the Shrine of Humility, located in the temple district's most modest chamber, where pilgrims must spend time in silent reflection on their spiritual journey and their place within the larger community of tribunal worshippers. This final shrine deliberately lacks the ornate decorations found at other locations, emphasizing the importance of inner spiritual development over external displays of devotion. Ancestral worship practices among the Dunmer create a parallel spiritual framework that coexists with tribunal veneration while addressing the specific needs of family lineages and clan relationships. These traditions center on the construction and maintenance of family shrines that serve as focal points for honoring deceased relatives and seeking their guidance in contemporary matters. The shrines themselves vary considerably in size and complexity, depending on the family's wealth and social status, but all share common elements that facilitate communication between the living and the dead. Traditional Dunmer family shrines occupy prominent positions within clan compounds or individual homes, typically located in dedicated rooms that are kept separate from daily living spaces. The shrine's central feature consists of a raised platform or altar where the cremated remains of family ancestors are housed in specially crafted urns or containers. These vessels, often made from materials significant to the deceased's life, such as their preferred metals or stones from meaningful locations, bear inscriptions that identify the individual and summarize their major accomplishments or contributions to family welfare. The arrangement of ancestral remains within family shrines follows specific protocols that reflect the deceased's relationships and status within the family hierarchy. The most honored positions, typically at the shrine's center or highest point, are reserved for family founders, war heroes, or individuals who made exceptional contributions to the clan's prosperity or reputation. Lesser positions accommodate more recent deceased or family members whose lives, while valued, did not achieve the same level of distinction. Surrounding the central altar, family shrines include personal belongings of the deceased that serve both as memorial items and as focal points for spiritual communication. These objects might include weapons used in notable battles, tools associated with the deceased's profession, jewelry with family significance, or books and scrolls that represent their intellectual achievements. The selection and placement of these items requires careful consideration of their symbolic meaning and their potential effectiveness in facilitating ancestral guidance. Daily maintenance of family shrines involves specific rituals that family members perform on a rotating basis, ensuring that the ancestors receive regular attention and that their spiritual presence remains active within the household. These maintenance activities include the burning of incense made from traditional Dunmer plants, the offering of small portions of food and drink, and the cleaning and polishing of shrine components to maintain their sacred appearance. The incense used in ancestral worship typically combines ingredients that were meaningful to the deceased during their lifetime, creating unique aromatic signatures that supposedly help attract the attention of specific ancestors. Common components include crushed flowers from the deceased's favorite plants, powdered materials from their professional tools, and small amounts of ash from locations they considered significant. The preparation of these incense mixtures requires knowledge of each ancestor's preferences and characteristics, information that families preserve through oral traditions passed down through generations. Food offerings at family shrines reflect both the deceased's preferences and the symbolic significance of various ingredients in Dunmer spiritual beliefs. Traditional offerings include portions of meals prepared for family consumption, with the ancestors receiving the first and best portions before the living family members eat. Special occasions may warrant more elaborate offerings, such as expensive imported foods, rare local delicacies, or dishes prepared according to recipes associated with specific ancestors. The practice of seeking ancestral guidance involves formal consultation rituals that family members perform when facing important decisions or difficult circumstances. These consultations typically occur during evening hours when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead is considered most permeable. The consultation process begins with extensive preparation of the shrine area, including the burning of large quantities of incense, the arrangement of particularly meaningful offerings, and the creation of a meditative atmosphere through reduced lighting and the elimination of distracting sounds. Family members conducting ancestral consultations enter a state of focused meditation while concentrating on specific questions or problems they wish to address. The ancestors' responses may manifest through various means, including subtle changes in the shrine's atmosphere, the appearance of meaningful symbols in incense smoke patterns, or the occurrence of significant dreams following the consultation session. Interpreting these ancestral communications requires considerable experience and knowledge of family history, as the messages often reference past events or use symbolic language that reflects the deceased's personality and communication style. The construction and maintenance of ancestor tombs represents a more elaborate extension of family shrine practices, involving substantial financial investment and community cooperation to create permanent resting places for deceased clan members. These tombs, built into hillsides or constructed as freestanding structures, serve multiple functions as burial sites, family gathering places, and repositories for clan treasures and historical records. Tomb construction projects typically require several years to complete, involving specialized craftsmen who understand the architectural requirements for creating structures that will remain stable and secure for centuries. The design process incorporates both practical considerations such as drainage, ventilation, and structural integrity, and spiritual requirements such as proper orientation relative to sacred directions, and the inclusion of symbolic elements that reflect the family's history and values. The interior layout of ancestor tombs follows traditional patterns that separate different types of deceased based on their status and relationships within the family structure. The most elaborate burial chambers are reserved for family patriarchs and matriarchs, featuring carved stone sarcophagi, elaborate wall decorations, and extensive collections of grave goods that demonstrate the deceased's wealth and achievements. Lesser chambers accommodate other family members according to their positions within the clan hierarchy, with the overall arrangement creating a physical representation of family relationships that persists beyond death. Great House political customs govern the complex web of relationships, obligations, and conflicts that define Dunmer society at its highest levels. These traditions, developed over millennia of inter-house competition and cooperation, establish formal protocols for everything from routine negotiations to matters of honor that may result in armed conflict between noble families. The intricate nature of these customs reflects the Dunmer cultural emphasis on personal honor, family loyalty, and the careful maintenance of social relationships that can determine the fate of entire communities. The formal challenge system represents one of the most distinctive aspects of Great House political culture, providing a structured mechanism for resolving disputes that might otherwise escalate into broader conflicts involving multiple families or entire house factions. Challenges may be issued for various reasons, including perceived insults to family honor, disputes over property or trade rights, disagreements about political policies, or violations of traditional protocols governing inter-house relationships. The process of issuing a formal challenge follows specific procedures that ensure both parties understand the nature of the dispute and the potential consequences of the proposed resolution. The challenging party must present their grievance in writing, using traditional formulaic language that clearly states the perceived offense, the satisfaction demanded, and the proposed method of resolution. This document, known as a challenge writ, must be delivered by a neutral intermediary who can verify that the challenge has been properly issued and received. Honor duels, the most dramatic form of challenge resolution, occur when disputes cannot be resolved through negotiation or when the nature of the offense demands personal combat to restore damaged honor. These duels follow elaborate protocols that govern everything from weapon selection and combat conditions to the presence of witnesses and the treatment of the defeated party. The rules governing honor duels vary somewhat between different great houses, reflecting their distinct cultural traditions and military preferences. House Redoran honor duels typically emphasize traditional Dunmer weapons and combat techniques, with participants fighting using matched sets of weapons provided by neutral parties to ensure fairness. The combat takes place in designated dueling grounds that feature raised platforms surrounded by seating areas for witnesses, creating a formal arena that emphasizes the ceremonial nature of the proceedings. Redoran dueling traditions require the presence of at least 3 witnesses from each participating house, along with a neutral arbiter who ensures that proper protocols are followed. House Lalu approaches honor duels with characteristic pragmatism, often incorporating elements that reflect the participants' professional skills or areas of expertise rather than relying solely on martial combat. Lalu duels might involve competitions in negotiation, trade skill demonstrations, or complex games of strategy that test intellectual rather than physical capabilities. When physical combat is necessary, Lalu traditions favor weapons that require finesse and precision rather than brute strength, such as rapiers or crossbows. House Telvanni honor duels frequently involve magical combat, with participants demonstrating their mastery of various schools of magic in structured competitions that test both raw power and technical skill. These magical duels take place in specially prepared chambers that include protective wards and containment spells to prevent collateral damage to spectators or surrounding property. Telvanni dueling traditions place great emphasis on creativity and innovation, with participants encouraged to develop unique spell combinations or magical techniques that demonstrate their individual mastery of the arcane arts. The protocols governing inter-house negotiations reflect the complex web of relationships, obligations, and competing interests that characterize Dunmer political culture. These negotiations may address issues ranging from trade agreements and territorial disputes to marriage alliances and military cooperation, with each type of negotiation following specific customs that have evolved over centuries of diplomatic practice. Formal negotiations between great houses typically begin with elaborate ceremonial exchanges that establish the relative status of the participating parties and create an atmosphere of mutual respect despite underlying conflicts. These opening ceremonies involve the exchange of gifts that demonstrate each house's wealth and cultural sophistication, with the value and appropriateness of the gifts sending subtle messages about the giver's intentions and expectations for the negotiation process. The selection of negotiation venues follows traditional protocols that ensure neutrality and provide appropriate settings for discussions that may determine the fate of thousands of people. Neutral locations such as ancient shrines, historic meeting halls, or specially constructed pavilions are preferred over facilities controlled by any of the participating houses. The physical arrangement of negotiation spaces reflects Dunmer cultural values, with seating arrangements, lighting, and decorative elements all chosen to create an atmosphere that encourages honest discussion while maintaining the dignity of all participants. Traditional Dunmer coming-of-age ceremonies mark the transition from childhood to adult status within the complex social structure of great house society. These ceremonies, which vary significantly between different houses and social classes, serve multiple functions as rites of passage, public declarations of family allegiance, and formal introductions of young Dunmer to the responsibilities and privileges of adult membership in their communities. House Redoran coming-of-age ceremonies emphasize martial prowess and personal courage, requiring young Dunmer to demonstrate their readiness for adult responsibilities through various tests of physical and moral strength. These tests typically include combat trials against experienced warriors, endurance challenges that may involve surviving alone in Morrowind's dangerous wilderness, and demonstrations of loyalty to house principals through service to community elders or participation in military training exercises. The combat trials that form the centerpiece of Redoran coming-of-age ceremonies are carefully structured to test the candidate's skills without creating unnecessary risk of serious injury or death. Young Dunmer face opponents using practice weapons in controlled environments, with experienced warriors serving as judges to evaluate their technique, courage, and adherence to honorable combat principles. Success in these trials requires not only physical skill, but also the demonstration of proper warrior attitudes such as respect for opponents, acceptance of defeat with dignity, and willingness to continue fighting despite adversity. House Lalu coming-of-age ceremonies focus on demonstrating the practical skills and social connections necessary for success in Morrowind's complex economic and political environment. Young Lalu must complete projects that showcase their abilities in areas such as trade negotiation, resource management, or diplomatic communication, with their performance evaluated by panels of experienced house members who understand the challenges they will face as adults. These practical demonstrations often involve real business transactions or political negotiations conducted under the supervision of house mentors, allowing young Dunmer to gain genuine experience while providing safeguards against serious mistakes that could damage family interests. Successful completion of these challenges requires not only technical competence, but also the development of the social skills and ethical principles that define Lalu culture and ensure the house's continued prosperity. House Telvanni coming-of-age ceremonies revolve around magical education and the demonstration of arcane abilities that will determine the individual's future role within the house's scholarly hierarchy. Young Telvanni must complete magical research projects, demonstrate mastery of specific spell schools, and often contribute original magical discoveries or innovations that advance the house's collective knowledge and power. The magical demonstrations required for Telvanni coming-of-age ceremonies are evaluated not only for technical proficiency, but also for creativity, originality, and potential contribution to the house's magical research programs. Young Dunmer who show exceptional promise may be selected for advanced training with master wizards, while those with more modest abilities are directed toward supporting roles that utilize their skills in service of the house's broader magical enterprises. The crystalline spires of Alinor pierce the azure skies above Somerset Isle like needles of pure starlight, their impossible geometries defying mortal comprehension while serving as monuments to Altmer cultural supremacy that has endured since the Dawn era. Within these towers and the sprawling complexes that connect them, the High Elves maintain social structures and ceremonial traditions of such intricate complexity that even learned scholars from other provinces struggle to comprehend their full significance and interconnected meanings. The Altmer social hierarchy operates according to principles that interweave bloodline purity, magical aptitude, scholarly achievement, and adherence to ancient customs in patterns that create dozens of distinct social strata, each with its own privileges, obligations, and ceremonial protocols. At the apex of this system stand the ancient bloodlines whose genealogies trace unbroken descent from the Aldmer who first settled Somerset, with some families claiming lineage that extends back to the mythical Aldmeri homeland of Aldmeris itself. These highest-ranking families, known collectively as the Kinlords, maintain elaborate family trees that document not only direct descent, but also marriage alliances, adoption ceremonies, and the magical abilities manifested by each generation. The genealogical records themselves represent masterworks of Altmer scholarship, inscribed on specially prepared vellum using inks infused with powdered moonstone and other materials that supposedly preserve the documents against the ravages of time, while imbuing them with subtle magical properties that prevent falsification. The preparation of these genealogical documents requires the services of specialized scribes who undergo decades of training in the precise calligraphic techniques, historical research methods, and magical procedures necessary for their creation. These scribes, known as lineage keepers, occupy a unique position within Altmer society that grants them access to the most closely guarded family secrets, while binding them to strict oaths of confidentiality that extend beyond death itself. Each entry in a family genealogy includes detailed information about the individual's magical specializations, scholarly achievements, political appointments, and contributions to Altmer culture, creating comprehensive records that serve both historical and practical purposes. When disputes arise regarding inheritance rights, marriage eligibility, or social precedents, these documents provide authoritative evidence that can resolve conflicts without resorting to more disruptive methods of arbitration. The physical presentation of genealogical records follows established conventions that communicate information about family status through visual elements, such as the quality of materials used, the complexity of illuminated decorations, and the inclusion of magical enhancements that create subtle effects when the documents are examined. The most prestigious families commission genealogies that incorporate threads of precious metals woven into the vellum itself, creating documents that shimmer with their own inner light, while displaying family crests and heraldic symbols that shift and change according to the viewer's perspective. Below the kinlords in the Altmer social hierarchy stand the various ranks of nobility whose positions depend on combinations of bloodline connections, personal achievements, and the favor of higher-ranking families. These middle-tier nobles, collectively referred to as the wise, include successful merchants, accomplished mages, distinguished scholars, and military officers who have earned recognition through their service to Altmer society while lacking the ancient bloodlines that would grant them higher status. The protocols governing interactions between different social ranks require intimate knowledge of genealogical relationships, current political alliances, and the subtle indicators of status that Altmer use to communicate their positions within the social hierarchy. A single conversation between Altmer of different ranks may involve dozens of ceremonial exchanges, carefully modulated speech patterns, and ritualized gestures that convey respect, establish social boundaries, and acknowledge the complex web of relationships that connects all participants. The formal greeting ceremonies that occur when Altmer of significantly different social ranks encounter each other follow patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. The lower-ranking individual must initiate the greeting sequence by adopting a specific posture that demonstrates recognition of the other's superior status, while avoiding any gesture that might be interpreted as servile or demeaning. The exact nature of this posture varies according to the degree of rank difference, the relationship between the participants' families, and the setting in which the encounter occurs. Higher-ranking Altmer respond to these greeting initiations with their own ritualized acknowledgments that confirm the social relationship while extending appropriate courtesy to the lower-ranking individual. These responses may include subtle magical displays that demonstrate the superior's arcane abilities, references to shared acquaintances or mutual interests that establish common ground, or invitations to participate in future social activities that reflect the nature of the relationship being established or maintained. The complexity of these greeting protocols extends to written correspondence, where the selection of writing materials, the style of calligraphy employed, and even the magical properties imbued in the ink communicate information about the sender's status and intentions. Letters between Altmer of different social ranks require careful attention to formulaic phrases, honorific titles, and closing expressions that must precisely reflect the relationship between the correspondents while avoiding any language that might inadvertently cause offense or misunderstanding. The Sapiarch academic institutions that serve as the intellectual heart of Altmer civilization operate according to traditions that emphasize rigorous scholarly methodology, collaborative research efforts, and the preservation of knowledge accumulated over millennia of careful study. These institutions, housed within crystal towers that rise from carefully landscaped grounds throughout Somerset, maintain vast libraries, experimental laboratories, and teaching facilities that support research programs covering every conceivable field of intellectual inquiry. The Crystal Tower of the Sapiarchs stands as the most prestigious of these academic institutions, its translucent walls containing chambers dedicated to specific branches of magical and scholarly research. The tower's internal structure defies conventional architectural principles, with rooms and corridors that shift their configurations according to the needs of ongoing research projects, while maintaining perfect stability and accessibility for authorized scholars and students. Within the tower's depths, the Archive of Accumulated Wisdom houses the most comprehensive collection of written knowledge in all of Tamriel, with scrolls, books, and crystalline storage devices containing information gathered from across the known world and beyond. The Archive's organization follows principles that reflect Altmer understanding of the relationships between different fields of knowledge, with materials arranged according to complex classification systems that group related topics while maintaining connections to associated subjects through an intricate network of cross-references and thematic links. The process of gaining access to materials within the archive requires demonstration of scholarly credentials, submission of detailed research proposals, and acceptance of strict protocols governing the handling and use of precious documents. Scholars seeking access to the most sensitive materials must undergo additional screening procedures that may include magical examinations designed to verify their intentions and assess their ability to comprehend and properly utilize the knowledge they seek to access. The daily routines within Sapiarch institutions begin before dawn with collective meditation sessions that prepare scholars for the intellectual challenges of their research work. These meditation practices, conducted in specially designed chambers that enhance mental clarity and focus, involve breathing exercises, visualization techniques, and the recitation of ancient formulae that supposedly align the practitioner's consciousness with the fundamental principles underlying all knowledge and understanding. Following the morning meditation, scholars participate in collaborative breakfast gatherings that serve both nutritional and intellectual purposes. These meals feature foods selected for their supposed cognitive benefits, including rare fruits that enhance memory retention, herbal teas that improve concentration, and specially prepared grains that provide sustained mental energy throughout long hours of intensive study. The conversations during these breakfast sessions often generate new research ideas or reveal connections between seemingly unrelated fields of inquiry. The primary research activities within Sapiarch institutions involve both individual scholarship and collaborative projects that bring together experts from multiple disciplines to address complex questions requiring interdisciplinary approaches. Individual research projects typically focus on highly specialized topics that contribute to the overall advancement of knowledge within specific fields, while collaborative efforts tackle broader questions that have implications for multiple areas of study. The experimental magical research conducted within Sapiarch facilities follows strict safety protocols developed through centuries of experience with dangerous arcane forces and unpredictable magical phenomena. Research chambers are equipped with multiple layers of protective wards, containment systems designed to isolate potentially hazardous magical effects, and emergency procedures that can rapidly neutralize experiments that threaten to exceed safe parameters. The documentation of research results requires adherence to standardized formats that ensure the reproducibility of experiments and the accurate communication of findings to other scholars. Research reports must include detailed descriptions of experimental procedures, complete listings of materials and magical components used, precise measurements of observed effects, and thorough analyses of the implications and potential applications of the discoveries made. The scholarly debate traditions maintained by Sapiarch institutions provide formal mechanisms for testing new theories, challenging established knowledge, and refining understanding through rigorous intellectual discourse. These debates follow elaborate protocols that ensure fair representation of different viewpoints, while maintaining the respectful atmosphere necessary for productive scholarly exchange. The Great Debates, held annually in the Crystal Tower's primary auditorium, represent the most prestigious of these scholarly competitions, attracting participants from throughout Somerset and occasionally drawing observers from other provinces who seek to witness the highest levels of Altmer intellectual achievement. The topics for these debates are selected through complex nomination and voting processes that ensure the selection of questions with genuine scholarly significance and broad interest among the academic community. Participants in the Great Debates must demonstrate their qualifications through preliminary competitions that test their knowledge of relevant source materials, their ability to construct logical arguments, and their skill in responding to challenges and counterarguments. The selection process typically reduces hundreds of initial applicants to a handful of finalists who represent the most promising scholars in their respective fields of expertise. The debate format itself involves multiple rounds of structured argumentation, with participants presenting their positions, responding to questions from panels of expert judges, and engaging in direct exchanges with their opponents. The judging criteria emphasize not only the accuracy and originality of the arguments presented, but also the clarity of expression, the logical consistency of the reasoning employed, and the participants' ability to acknowledge the strengths of opposing viewpoints while defending their own positions. Altmer ancestor veneration practices create elaborate networks of family obligations and ceremonial observances that connect living Altmer to their genealogical heritage, while reinforcing the social hierarchies that define their civilization. These traditions center on the construction and maintenance of family monuments that serve as focal points for honoring deceased relatives and preserving the memory of their contributions to family prestige and Altmer culture more broadly. The most elaborate of these monuments take the form of crystal gardens, carefully designed landscapes that incorporate living plants with crystalline structures that supposedly contain the preserved essences of deceased family members. These gardens require constant maintenance by specialists who understand both horticultural techniques and the magical procedures necessary for maintaining the crystal formations that serve as repositories for ancestral memories and wisdom. The selection of plants for crystal gardens follows traditional principles that associate different species with various virtues and characteristics that the deceased family members exemplified during their lifetimes. Scholars are honored with varieties known for their longevity and steady growth, while warriors receive commemoration through plants that display vibrant colors or possess natural defensive characteristics such as thorns or toxic properties. The crystal formations within these gardens are created through complex magical processes that bind aspects of the deceased's personality and knowledge into specially prepared gemstones that are then integrated into larger crystalline structures. These binding procedures require the services of master enchanters who specialize in the delicate work of preserving consciousness and memory within inanimate materials without creating the dangerous conditions that might result in undead manifestations or other uncontrolled supernatural phenomena. The daily maintenance rituals performed in crystal gardens involve both practical activities such as pruning, watering, and soil cultivation, and magical procedures that maintain the integrity of the crystal formations and strengthen the connections between the living family members and their preserved ancestors. These maintenance activities provide opportunities for family members to commune with their deceased relatives, seeking guidance on important decisions, or simply maintaining the emotional connections that bind families together across the generations. The consultation procedures used to seek ancestral guidance follow formal protocols that ensure proper respect for the deceased while maximizing the clarity and usefulness of any communications that may occur. Family members preparing for these consultations must undergo purification rituals that cleanse them of distracting influences and align their consciousness with the elevated spiritual state necessary for effective communication with preserved ancestral essences. The purification process typically involves fasting periods that may last several days, during which the consultant consumes only specially prepared foods and beverages that supposedly enhance spiritual sensitivity while avoiding substances that might interfere with the delicate magical processes involved in ancestral communication. The specific dietary requirements vary according to the nature of the guidance being sought and the particular ancestors being contacted, with different family members requiring different approaches based on their personalities and areas of expertise. Traditional Altmer artistic pursuits reflect their culture's emphasis on perfection, mathematical precision, and the integration of magical elements into creative expression. These art forms require years of training to master, and often involve collaborative efforts that bring together artists with complementary skills to create works that exceed what any individual could accomplish alone. Crystal singing represents perhaps the most distinctive of Altmer artistic traditions, involving the use of specially prepared crystalline instruments that produce sounds of extraordinary purity and complexity when manipulated by trained practitioners. The crystals used in these instruments are grown rather than mined, cultivated in carefully controlled magical environments that imbue them with specific acoustic properties and harmonic resonances that determine their musical characteristics. The process of growing musical crystals requires months or even years of careful attention, with master crystal singers monitoring the growth conditions and making subtle adjustments to magical fields, temperature, humidity, and other environmental factors that influence the developing crystal's final properties. The most prized musical crystals display perfect geometric forms and internal structures that create complex harmonic relationships when they vibrate in response to magical manipulation. Crystal singing performances involve multiple practitioners working together to create intricate musical compositions that exploit the unique acoustic properties of their crystalline instruments. The music produced through these performances often incorporates mathematical relationships and harmonic progressions that reflect Altmer understanding of the underlying numerical principles that govern natural phenomena and magical forces. The training required to become a skilled crystal singer begins in childhood with intensive instruction in mathematics, music theory, and the basic principles of crystal cultivation and manipulation. Students spend years learning to sense the subtle vibrations and harmonic relationships that determine how different crystals will interact when played together, developing the sensitivity and precision necessary for participating in complex ensemble performances. Advanced crystal singing techniques involve the real-time modification of crystal properties during performances, allowing skilled practitioners to adjust the harmonic characteristics of their instruments to create effects that would be impossible with conventional musical instruments. These modifications require deep understanding of both musical theory and crystal magic, as well as the ability to coordinate complex magical manipulations while maintaining perfect timing and musical expression. Mathematical poetry represents another uniquely Altmer art form that combines literary expression with numerical relationships and geometric principles to create works that operate on multiple levels of meaning and aesthetic appreciation. These poems incorporate mathematical concepts not merely as subject matter, but as structural elements that determine rhythm, rhyme patterns, and the relationships between different sections of the work. The composition of mathematical poetry requires mastery of both literary techniques and advanced mathematical concepts, with poets often spending decades developing the skills necessary to create works that satisfy both artistic and mathematical criteria for excellence. The most accomplished mathematical poets can create works that express complex emotional and philosophical concepts while simultaneously demonstrating elegant mathematical relationships and geometric principles. The ceremonial crafting of glass and precious stone artifacts serves both artistic and practical purposes within Altmer society, producing objects that demonstrate technical mastery while serving functional roles in religious ceremonies, scholarly activities, and social rituals. These crafting traditions involve techniques that have been refined over millennia, with master craftsmen passing their knowledge to carefully selected apprentices who must demonstrate both technical skill and deep understanding of the cultural significance of their work. The selection of materials for ceremonial artifacts follows strict guidelines that consider not only the physical properties of different substances, but also their symbolic meanings and magical characteristics. Precious stones are chosen based on their associations with specific virtues, magical properties, and historical significance, while glass compositions are formulated to achieve particular optical effects and magical resonances that enhance the artifact's intended function. The actual crafting process combines traditional techniques with magical procedures that imbue the finished artifacts with properties that exceed what purely physical craftsmanship could achieve. Master craftsmen work in specially prepared workshops that maintain precise environmental conditions while providing access to magical energies that can be channeled into the developing artifacts during critical stages of their creation. The sun-scorched sands of Hammerfell conceal, beneath their shifting surface, a warrior culture whose traditions run deeper than the ancient aquifers that sustain the great cities of Sentinel and Stroh's Emkai. Here, where the curved sabers of the Ragada first carved out an empire from Yakutan refugees, the Red Guards have maintained customs that blend the mystical sword-singing arts of their ancestors with the practical necessities of survival in one of Tamriel's most unforgiving environments. The Way of the Sword represents far more than mere martial training within Redguard society, encompassing a comprehensive philosophy that governs personal conduct, spiritual development, and the relationship between the individual warrior and the cosmic forces that shape existence. This ancient discipline traces its origins to the legendary Ansei, the sword singers of Old Yakuta, whose mastery of blade and spirit allowed them to achieve feats that transcended the boundaries between physical combat and magical manipulation of reality itself. The fundamental principles underlying the Way of the Sword emphasize the unity between warrior and weapon, requiring practitioners to develop not only physical prowess, but also the mental discipline necessary to achieve perfect harmony with their chosen blade. This harmony manifests through years of meditation, physical conditioning, and the gradual cultivation of the spiritual awareness that allows truly skilled swordsmen to sense their opponent's intentions before they are consciously formed, and to move with a fluidity that appears supernatural to untrained observers. Training in the Way of the Sword begins in early childhood with exercises designed to develop the flexibility, balance, and coordination that form the foundation for more advanced techniques. Young Redguards spend hours each day practicing basic movements that teach proper body alignment, breathing patterns, and the mental focus required for sustained concentration during combat. These fundamental exercises, known as the flowing forms, incorporate elements drawn from the observation of natural phenomena, such as the movement of sand dunes in desert winds, the flow of water over stone, and the hunting patterns of desert predators. The progression from basic forms to intermediate techniques requires not only physical development, but also the cultivation of specific mental states that allow practitioners to transcend the limitations of conscious thought during combat. Advanced students learn to enter meditative trances while maintaining full awareness of their surroundings, developing the ability to respond to threats with perfect timing, while their conscious minds remain focused on higher spiritual principles rather than the immediate tactical concerns of battle. The most accomplished practitioners of the Way of the Sword achieve a state of consciousness known as the singing trance, in which the boundary between warrior and weapon dissolves entirely, allowing them to channel forces that enable superhuman feats of speed, precision, and power. Warriors who reach this level of mastery report that their swords seem to move independently, guided by an intelligence that transcends individual will while remaining perfectly aligned with their intentions and moral principles. The spiritual discipline required to achieve mastery of the blade involves daily practices that extend far beyond physical training, encompassing meditation techniques, dietary restrictions, and behavioral codes that shape every aspect of the practitioner's life. These disciplines vary somewhat between different schools and regional traditions, but all share common elements that reflect the underlying philosophy of the Way of the Sword and its emphasis on the integration of martial skill, with spiritual development. Morning meditation sessions begin before dawn in specially prepared training grounds that provide the quiet and isolation necessary for deep contemplation. These meditation practices involve breathing exercises that supposedly align the practitioner's internal energies with the natural rhythms of the desert environment, visualization techniques that strengthen mental focus and emotional control, and the recitation of ancient formulae that connect the individual warrior to the collective wisdom of generations of sword masters. The breathing exercises taught to advanced students involve complex patterns that coordinate inhalation and exhalation with specific body movements and mental visualizations. These techniques supposedly enhance physical endurance while promoting the mental clarity necessary for perceiving the subtle energy flows that skilled warriors learn to manipulate during combat. The most advanced breathing practices are said to allow masters of the way to sustain intense physical activity for extended periods without fatigue, while maintaining perfect mental focus throughout. Dietary restrictions followed by serious practitioners of the way of the sword reflect beliefs about the relationship between physical purity and spiritual development. These restrictions typically involve the avoidance of foods that supposedly cloud mental clarity or interfere with the body's natural energy flows, including excessive amounts of meat, fermented beverages, and heavily spiced dishes that might overstimulate the senses. Instead, practitioners favor simple foods such as dates, nuts, grains, and specially prepared herbal teas that supposedly enhance concentration and physical vitality. The behavioral codes that govern the daily conduct of sword masters extend beyond combat situations to encompass all aspects of personal interaction and social responsibility. These codes emphasize honesty, courage, loyalty to legitimate authority, protection of the innocent, and the maintenance of personal honor through adherence to moral principles, even when such adherence requires personal sacrifice or places the individual at tactical disadvantage. The complex honor codes governing Redguard society create intricate webs of obligation, responsibility, and mutual respect that influence everything from commercial transactions to political negotiations. These codes, developed over centuries of tribal warfare and refined through generations of urban civilization, provide frameworks for resolving conflicts while maintaining social stability and individual dignity within communities where personal reputation represents a form of currency as valuable as gold or political influence. The concept of personal honor within Redguard culture encompasses multiple dimensions that include martial prowess, adherence to given word, treatment of family members and social dependence, and the maintenance of behavior patterns that reflect positively on one's ancestors and descendants. This multifaceted understanding of honor creates situations where individuals must balance competing obligations and make difficult choices that test their commitment to the principles that define their cultural identity. Formal dueling protocols provide structured mechanisms for resolving disputes that threaten individual honor or community stability, while minimizing the risk of broader conflicts that might destabilize entire regions. These protocols vary somewhat between different cities and tribal groups, but all share common elements that ensure fair treatment of participants while maintaining the ceremonial dignity appropriate to matters involving personal honor and social standing. The process of issuing a formal challenge begins with the presentation of a written statement that clearly identifies the nature of the grievance, the satisfaction demanded, and the proposed method of resolution. This document, known as a challenge scroll, must be prepared according to specific formatting requirements and delivered through neutral intermediaries who can verify that proper procedures have been followed and that both parties understand the implications of the proposed duel. The selection of weapons for formal duels follows traditional guidelines that consider the nature of the dispute, the social status of the participants, and the availability of suitable equipment. Most duels involve matched pairs of curved sabers provided by neutral parties to ensure fairness, though disputes involving specific types of honor may require the use of particular weapon types that reflect the symbolic nature of the conflict being resolved. Dueling grounds used for formal combat are typically located in neutral territories that provide appropriate settings for ceremonial combat while ensuring that the results will be respected by all relevant parties. These locations often feature raised platforms or marked circles that define the combat area, seating arrangements for required witnesses, and facilities for medical treatment of injured participants. The selection of dueling grounds requires agreement between the participants or their representatives, with disputes over location sometimes requiring arbitration by respected community elders. The conduct of formal duels follows elaborate ceremonial procedures that begin with the ritual inspection of weapons and armor, continue through formal statements by both participants regarding the nature of their dispute, and conclude with the actual combat and the declaration of results by appointed judges. These ceremonies serve multiple purposes, including the public demonstration of each participant's commitment to honorable conduct, the creation of official records that document the resolution of the dispute, and the reinforcement of community values regarding the proper handling of conflicts involving personal honor. The resolution of blood feuds between noble houses requires even more complex procedures that may involve multiple generations and extensive negotiations between family representatives, tribal elders, and religious authorities. These feuds typically originate from serious offenses such as murder, betrayal of trust, or violations of hospitality customs, creating cycles of retaliation that can persist for decades unless formally resolved through established mechanisms that address the underlying causes of conflict while providing appropriate compensation for damages suffered. Blood feud resolution procedures begin with formal acknowledgement of the grievances held by each side, followed by detailed negotiations regarding appropriate forms of compensation or satisfaction that might restore the balance of honor between the conflicting parties. These negotiations often involve complex calculations that consider not only the immediate damages caused by the original offense, but also the subsequent costs incurred through cycles of retaliation and the long-term effects of the conflict on family reputation and social standing. The forms of compensation demanded in blood feud resolutions may include financial payments, transfers of property or trade rights, marriage alliances that create binding relationships between previously hostile families, or ceremonial acknowledgments of wrongdoing that restore the honor of injured parties. The specific terms of resolution must be acceptable to all parties involved and must address the underlying issues that created the original conflict, while preventing future disputes from arising over the same matters. Traditional Redguard maritime customs reflect the culture's deep connection to the sea as both a source of livelihood and a pathway for exploration, trade, and military expansion. These customs, developed during the early centuries following the Ragada migration from Yakuta, combine practical knowledge accumulated through generations of seafaring experience with spiritual beliefs about the relationship between human activity and the natural forces that govern ocean conditions and weather patterns. Ship blessing ceremonies performed before major voyages involve elaborate rituals designed to ensure divine protection during dangerous ocean journeys, while honoring the maritime deities, whose favor determines the success or failure of seafaring ventures. These ceremonies typically take place at dawn on the day of departure, with the ship's crew, passengers, and their families gathering on the dock to participate in prayers and offerings that supposedly secure supernatural assistance for the upcoming voyage. The preparation for ship blessing ceremonies begins several days in advance with the gathering of appropriate offerings and the purification of participants through fasting, ritual bathing, and the avoidance of activities that might attract malevolent supernatural attention. The offerings themselves typically include valuable items such as jewelry, precious metals, fine fabrics, and specially prepared foods that demonstrate the participants' commitment to honoring the maritime deities while providing tangible evidence of their prosperity and success. The central ritual of ship blessing ceremonies involves the ceremonial anointing of the vessel's prow with oils and waters that have been blessed by priests or other religious authorities. These substances, prepared according to ancient formulae that supposedly imbue them with protective properties, are applied to specific portions of the ship's structure, while prayers are recited that invoke divine protection against storms, sea monsters, pirates, and other dangers that threaten ocean travelers. Navigation rituals performed during long voyages provide ongoing spiritual support for crews facing the uncertainties and dangers of extended ocean travel. These rituals typically involve daily observances that maintain the crew's connection to protective deities, while reinforcing the discipline and cooperation necessary for successful navigation under challenging conditions. The specific nature of these rituals varies according to the length and destination of the voyage, the size and composition of the crew, and the particular maritime traditions followed by the ship's captain and officers. Daily navigation rituals often begin with sunrise prayers that acknowledge the sun's role in providing directional guidance, while requesting continued favorable weather and safe passage to the intended destination. These prayers are typically led by the ship's captain or a designated crew member who has received appropriate religious training, with all available crew members participating in responses and ceremonial gestures that demonstrate their collective commitment to the voyage's success. Evening navigation rituals focus on the stars and their role in providing guidance during nighttime sailing, with crew members participating in observations and calculations that serve both practical and spiritual purposes. These evening ceremonies often include the sharing of food and drink that has been blessed during morning rituals, creating opportunities for crew members to strengthen their social bonds while maintaining their spiritual discipline throughout the voyage. The veneration of maritime deities during sea voyages involves specific prayers, offerings, and behavioral restrictions that supposedly ensure divine favor while avoiding actions that might provoke supernatural retaliation. The primary maritime deities honored by Redguard sailors include aspects of traditional Yakutan gods adapted to reflect the particular challenges and opportunities associated with ocean travel, as well as local spirits believed to inhabit specific bodies of water or coastal regions. Prayers to maritime deities typically request protection from storms and other natural hazards, guidance in navigation and route selection, favorable winds and currents that speed the voyage's progress, and success in any commercial or military objectives that motivate the journey. These prayers follow traditional formulae that have been refined through generations of use, with specific variations appropriate to different types of voyages and different categories of supernatural assistance being sought. Offerings to maritime deities during voyages often involve the ceremonial disposal of valuable items overboard at specific locations or under particular circumstances that supposedly maximize their effectiveness in securing divine favor. These offerings may include portions of the ship's food supplies, personal possessions of crew members or passengers, or specially prepared items created specifically for ceremonial use. The timing and location of these offerings follow traditional guidelines that consider factors such as weather conditions, the ship's position relative to known landmarks, and the phase of the moon. The role of the crown's versus forebears political divide in shaping cultural celebrations and religious observances throughout Hammerfell creates distinct regional variations in how traditional customs are practiced and interpreted. This fundamental division within Redguard society, originating from disagreements about the proper relationship between traditional Yakutan culture and imperial influence, has evolved into a complex web of political, religious, and cultural differences that affect virtually every aspect of Redguard life. Crown communities, concentrated primarily in the interior regions of Hammerfell around cities, such as Sentinel, maintain stronger adherence to traditional Yakutan customs and resist imperial cultural influences that they view as corrupting or weakening authentic Redguard identity. Their celebrations and religious observances emphasize historical connections to the Ra-Gada migration, the preservation of ancient customs, and the maintenance of cultural practices that distinguish Redguards from other peoples of Tamriel. Crown religious observances typically involve elaborate ceremonies that honor traditional Yakutan deities and ancestral spirits, with particular emphasis on the warrior heroes who led the Ragada conquest of Hammerfell. These ceremonies often feature traditional music performed on authentic Yakutan instruments, ritual dances that reenact historical events, and the display of ancient weapons and artifacts that connect contemporary Redguards to their cultural heritage. Crown cultural celebrations frequently incorporate competitive elements that test participants' mastery of traditional skills, such as swordsmanship, archery, horsemanship, and desert survival techniques. These competitions serve both entertainment and educational purposes, providing opportunities for skilled practitioners to demonstrate their abilities, while encouraging younger Redguards to develop the capabilities that Crown communities consider essential for maintaining authentic cultural identity. Forebear communities, primarily located in coastal regions and areas with significant imperial influence, have developed cultural practices that blend traditional Redguard customs with elements drawn from imperial and other foreign sources. Their approach to celebrations and religious observances reflects a more pragmatic attitude toward cultural change and a greater willingness to adapt traditional practices to contemporary circumstances and opportunities. Forebear religious observances often incorporate elements from imperial religious traditions alongside traditional Yakutan practices, creating syncretic ceremonies that acknowledge multiple spiritual influences while maintaining distinctively Redguard characteristics. These blended practices may include prayers to imperial deities alongside traditional gods, the use of imperial ceremonial elements within traditional ritual frameworks, and the adaptation of traditional ceremonies to accommodate participants from diverse cultural backgrounds. Forebear cultural celebrations tend to emphasize commercial and diplomatic success alongside traditional martial achievements, reflecting their community's greater integration into Tamriel's broader economic and political networks. These celebrations may feature displays of wealth and luxury goods obtained through trade, demonstrations of diplomatic and negotiation skills, and competitions in activities that reflect the diverse opportunities available within cosmopolitan urban environments. The differences between Crown and Forebear approaches to traditional customs create ongoing tensions within Redguard society, while also contributing to the richness and diversity of cultural expression throughout Hammerfell. These tensions manifest in debates over the proper interpretation of ancient traditions, disagreements about the appropriate response to imperial policies and cultural influences, and competition for political influence and social prestige within Redguard communities. Marriage customs within both Crown and Forebear communities reflect the broader cultural and political divisions, while maintaining common elements that emphasize family honor, social alliance, and the continuation of cultural traditions. These customs involve elaborate negotiations between families, ceremonial exchanges that demonstrate mutual respect and commitment, and celebrations that reinforce community bonds while publicly acknowledging the new relationships being created. The mist-shrouded valleys of Hyrok harbor a civilization built upon layers of obligation and ceremony as intricate as the stonework of ancient Dirani towers, where Breton society has evolved into a complex feudal system that weaves together Nordic pragmatism, Aldmeri sophistication, and distinctly human ambition into patterns of governance and social interaction unmatched elsewhere in Tamriel. Within the walls of Daggerfall's merchant palaces and Weirist's political chambers, nobles conduct their affairs according to protocols that transform every interaction into a carefully choreographed display of status, allegiance, and power. The Breton feudal hierarchy operates through an elaborate network of personal bonds that create chains of obligation, extending from the humblest village knight to the kings who rule the major city-states. These relationships, formalized through ceremonies of homage and sealed with sacred oaths, establish not merely political alliances, but spiritual connections that bind participants to codes of conduct, governing everything from military service to commercial transactions. The complexity of these arrangements reflects the Breton genius for organization and their deep understanding of how personal relationships can be structured to create stable political institutions. At the foundation of this system stands the ceremony of knighthood, a ritual transformation that elevates worthy individuals from common status to the lowest rung of the noble hierarchy, while binding them to a comprehensive code of obligations and privileges. The path to knighthood typically begins in childhood, when promising young Bretons enter the households of established knights as pages, beginning a process of education and evaluation that may span decades before culminating in the formal ceremony that grants them noble status. The training of prospective knights encompasses far more than martial instruction, requiring mastery of literacy, mathematics, basic legal principles, religious doctrine, and the social graces necessary for functioning within aristocratic society. Pages spend their days rotating between different instructors who teach specialized skills, from swordplay and horsemanship to etiquette and heraldry. The education emphasizes not only technical competence, but also the development of character traits considered essential for knightly service, including courage, honesty, loyalty, and the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. The progression from page to squire marks a significant advancement in the candidate's preparation for knighthood, involving increased responsibilities and more direct participation in their mentor's activities. Squires accompany their knights on journeys, assist in the maintenance of weapons and equipment, and begin to participate in actual combat situations under careful supervision. This period of service typically lasts several years and provides opportunities for the candidate to demonstrate their readiness for the full responsibilities of knighthood through their performance in real-world situations. The formal ceremony of knighthood takes place in settings that emphasize the sacred nature of the transformation being accomplished, typically within the chapels of major castles or the cathedrals of important cities. The ceremony begins with a vigil during which the candidate spends an entire night in prayer and meditation, contemplating the obligations they are about to accept and seeking divine guidance for their future service. This solitary vigil occurs in the presence of sacred relics or blessed weapons that supposedly imbue the ceremony with supernatural significance. The actual dubbing ceremony involves multiple participants who represent different aspects of the feudal system into which the new knight will be integrated. The candidate's sponsor, typically the knight who supervised their training, presents them to the presiding noble who will perform the actual dubbing. This presentation includes a formal recitation of the candidate's qualifications, training history, and demonstrated readiness for knightly responsibilities. The presiding noble, often a baron or higher-ranking aristocrat, conducts an examination that tests the candidate's knowledge of their obligations and their commitment to fulfilling them honorably. The physical act of dubbing involves the ritual touching of the candidate's shoulders with a consecrated sword, while specific words are spoken that formally grant knightly status and enumerate the new knight's duties and privileges. This moment represents the culmination of years of preparation and marks the beginning of a lifetime of service to the feudal hierarchy. The newly dubbed knight then takes formal oaths of loyalty to their immediate lord, and through them, to the broader network of feudal relationships that structure Breton society. The oaths sworn during knighthood ceremonies follow traditional formulae that have evolved over centuries of feudal practice, incorporating elements drawn from both secular and religious traditions. These oaths typically include promises to defend the church, protect the innocent, serve one's lord faithfully, maintain personal honor, and uphold the laws and customs of the realm. The specific wording may vary between different regions and noble houses, but the essential elements remain consistent throughout Hyrok. The ceremony concludes with the presentation of symbols representing the new knight's status and responsibilities, including spurs that signify their right to ride as mounted warriors, a sword that represents their obligation to defend justice, and often a ring or other token that identifies their particular lord or house affiliation. These items are blessed during the ceremony and are expected to be carried or worn throughout the knight's career as constant reminders of their sworn obligations. The web of vassalage relationships that extends upward from newly dubbed knights creates the political structure through which Breton kingdoms function, with each level of the hierarchy bound to those above and below through formal ceremonies that establish mutual obligations and rights. These relationships are not merely political conveniences, but sacred bonds that carry both practical and spiritual significance for all participants. The ceremony of homage, through which a vassal formally acknowledges their lord, follows ancient protocols that emphasize the personal nature of feudal relationships while establishing clear hierarchies of authority and obligation. The vassal kneels before their lord and places their hands between the lord's hands while reciting an oath that promises faithful service, military support when required, and loyalty in all matters affecting their lord's interests. The lord responds by accepting the vassal's service and promising protection, fair treatment, and support in times of need. These homage ceremonies often include the exchange of symbolic gifts that represent the relationship being established, with the lord typically granting the vassal some form of property or privilege that provides the economic foundation for their service. The vassal may present gifts that demonstrate their wealth and commitment, creating a reciprocal exchange that reinforces the mutual nature of feudal obligations despite the clear hierarchy of authority. The complexity of vassalage relationships in hierarchy creates situations where individual nobles may hold multiple allegiances to different lords, requiring careful navigation of potentially conflicting obligations. A knight might hold lands from one baron while serving another in military campaigns, creating dual loyalties that must be balanced through diplomatic skill and careful attention to the specific terms of each relationship. These complex arrangements reflect the political fragmentation of hierarchy and the need for flexible alliances that can adapt to changing circumstances. The resolution of conflicts between competing feudal obligations requires formal procedures that involve consultation with legal experts, examination of the specific terms of relevant oaths, and sometimes arbitration by higher-ranking nobles who can provide neutral judgment. These procedures emphasize the importance of written records and precise language in feudal contracts, leading to the development of sophisticated legal traditions that influence all aspects of Breton society. The integration of magical traditions into Breton feudal culture creates unique customs that blend Nordic shamanic practices with Aldmeri arcane sophistication, producing distinctive approaches to magic that serve both practical and ceremonial functions within noble society. The Breton affinity for magic manifests not only in their natural aptitude for spellcasting, but also in their systematic approach to magical education and their integration of magical practices into political and social institutions. Hedge magic traditions, practiced primarily in rural areas and smaller communities, represent the folk magical heritage that Bretons inherited from their Nordic ancestors while adapting it to local conditions and needs. These practices typically involve the use of locally available materials such as herbs, stones, and animal parts to create charms, potions, and minor enchantments that address everyday problems and concerns. Hedge magic practitioners, often village-wise women or local cunning men, serve their communities by providing magical solutions for agricultural problems, minor illnesses, protection against supernatural threats, and assistance with various domestic concerns. The training of hedge magic practitioners typically occurs through informal apprenticeships that pass knowledge from one generation to the next within families or small communities. This knowledge includes the identification and preparation of magical materials, the proper timing for various rituals and spell casting activities, and the traditional formulae and procedures that have proven effective over generations of practice. The emphasis is on practical results rather than theoretical understanding, with practitioners learning through direct experience and observation rather than formal study. The relationship between hedge magic and formal magical education creates interesting dynamics within Breton society, as many nobles who receive sophisticated magical training also maintain connections to the folk traditions of their ancestral lands. This dual heritage allows Breton mages to draw upon both scholarly knowledge and intuitive understanding, creating magical practices that are both theoretically sound and practically effective. Court wizards occupy prestigious positions within the households of major nobles, serving as advisors, researchers, and practitioners of high magic that supports their lord's political and military objectives. These positions require not only exceptional magical ability, but also the diplomatic skills necessary for navigating the complex relationships and competing interests that characterize noble courts. Court wizards must balance their roles as magical specialists with their functions as political advisors, often finding themselves involved in delicate negotiations and strategic planning that extends far beyond purely magical concerns. The selection of court wizards involves careful evaluation of candidates' magical abilities, educational background, political reliability, and personal character. Noble houses typically seek wizards whose magical specializations complement their particular needs and interests, with military-oriented houses favoring battle mages and specialists in protective magic, while commercially focused nobles prefer wizards skilled in divination, communication magic, and enchantment of trade goods. The daily responsibilities of court wizards vary considerably depending on their lord's needs and the specific terms of their employment, but typically include magical research projects, the creation of enchanted items for household use, consultation on matters requiring magical expertise, and the provision of magical services during important ceremonies and negotiations. Many court wizards also serve educational functions, providing magical instruction for their lord's children and other household members who show aptitude for spellcasting. The magical laboratories maintained by court wizards represent significant investments in both equipment and materials, often occupying entire towers or specially constructed wings of noble residences. These facilities include libraries of magical texts, collections of rare reagents and components, specialized tools and apparatus for magical research, and protective measures designed to contain dangerous magical experiments. The construction and maintenance of these laboratories requires ongoing financial support from noble patrons, creating relationships of mutual dependence that strengthen the bonds between wizards and their employers. The influence of chivalric ideals on Breton culture extends far beyond military matters to encompass comprehensive codes of conduct that govern behavior in all aspects of noble life. These ideals, which emphasize honor, courtesy, protection of the weak, and service to higher principles, create cultural frameworks that influence everything from personal relationships to commercial transactions and political negotiations. The concept of courtly love, imported from imperial romantic traditions but adapted to reflect Breton sensibilities, creates elaborate social customs surrounding relationships between men and women of noble birth. These customs involve ritualized courtship practices, formal protocols for expressing romantic interest, and codes of conduct that emphasize restraint, respect, and the elevation of romantic relationships to spiritual significance. The influence of courtly love traditions can be seen in Breton literature, music, and art, as well as in the social customs that govern interactions at noble courts and ceremonial gatherings. Tournament traditions provide formal venues for the display of martial skill, while reinforcing the social hierarchies and cultural values that define Breton noble society. These events, typically held during major festivals or to celebrate important occasions such as weddings or political alliances, combine competitive combat with elaborate social ceremonies that strengthen relationships between noble houses and provide opportunities for young knights to establish their reputations. The organization of tournaments requires months of preparation and significant financial investment, with host nobles competing to present the most impressive displays of wealth and hospitality. Tournament grounds are constructed with raised platforms for spectators, elaborate pavilions for participating knights, and facilities for the various competitions and ceremonies that comprise the event. The tournaments themselves typically include multiple forms of competition, from individual combat with various weapons to team events that test coordination and tactical skill. The pageantry surrounding tournaments involves elaborate displays of heraldry, with participating knights and their retinues wearing colors and symbols that identify their house affiliations and personal achievements. These visual displays serve both decorative and informational functions, allowing spectators to understand the relationships and rivalries between participants, while creating spectacular visual effects that enhance the ceremonial atmosphere of the events. The religious aspects of tournament culture reflect the integration of martial activities with spiritual observances, with tournaments typically beginning and ending with ceremonies that invoke divine blessing and protection for participants. These religious elements emphasize the moral dimensions of knightly combat and reinforce the connection between martial prowess and spiritual virtue that underlies chivalric ideals. The veneration of Stendar and other divines within Breton religious culture creates distinctive ceremonial traditions that blend imperial theological concepts with local customs and beliefs. Stendar's role as the divine of mercy and justice makes him particularly significant within the context of feudal society, where questions of justice, protection of the innocent, and the proper use of power are constant concerns for those who hold authority over others. Stendar's temples throughout Hyrok serve not only as places of worship, but also as centers for charitable activities, legal arbitration, and the administration of justice in cases involving religious law. The priests of Stendar often serve as advisors to secular authorities on matters involving moral and ethical questions, providing guidance that helps nobles navigate the complex obligations created by their feudal relationships and chivalric codes. The ceremonies honoring Stendar typically emphasize themes of protection, justice, and mercy, with rituals that involve the blessing of weapons and armor used by knights and other defenders of the innocent. These blessings supposedly imbue the equipment with divine power that enhances its effectiveness against evil, while ensuring that it will be used only for righteous purposes. The blessing ceremonies follow elaborate protocols that require the participation of ordained priests and the presence of witnesses who can verify that proper procedures have been followed. Regional variations in Breton customs across the various kingdoms of Hyrok reflect the political fragmentation and diverse influences that have shaped different areas over centuries of independent development. These variations create a rich tapestry of local traditions that maintain common elements while expressing distinctive characteristics that reflect the particular histories and circumstances of different regions. Daggerfall's merchant traditions emphasize commercial success and economic innovation, creating customs that celebrate entrepreneurship while maintaining the feudal structures that provide political stability. The city's position as a major trading center has led to the development of elaborate ceremonies surrounding the establishment of trade agreements, the opening of new commercial ventures, and the celebration of economic achievements. These ceremonies often involve the exchange of symbolic gifts between trading partners, formal oaths that establish the terms of commercial relationships, and celebrations that strengthen the social bonds necessary for successful long-term business relationships. The merchant guilds of Daggerfall have developed their own hierarchical structures that parallel the feudal nobility while serving different functions within the city's social and economic systems. Guild ceremonies mark the advancement of members through various ranks, celebrate successful commercial ventures, and provide formal mechanisms for resolving disputes between competing merchants. These ceremonies often incorporate elements drawn from both secular and religious traditions, creating unique customs that reflect the distinctive culture of Daggerfall's commercial elite. Wearist's political ceremonies reflect the city's role as a center of diplomatic activity and political intrigue, with elaborate protocols governing everything from formal state visits to the negotiation of treaties and alliances. The city's position as a major political center has led to the development of sophisticated ceremonial traditions that serve both practical and symbolic functions in the conduct of international relations. The Royal Court of Wearist maintains elaborate daily routines that provide formal structures for the conduct of government business, while reinforcing the hierarchical relationships that define the kingdom's political system. Court ceremonies mark important political events, provide opportunities for nobles to demonstrate their loyalty and status, and create formal venues for the presentation of petitions and the conduct of official business. These ceremonies follow ancient protocols that have been refined over generations of royal practice, creating traditions that combine practical governance functions with the symbolic displays necessary for maintaining royal authority and prestige. The ancient canopy of Valenwood stretches endlessly overhead like a living cathedral, where massive grot oaks tower hundreds of feet into the sky, and their interwoven branches form platforms and walkways that have never known the touch of axe or saw. Within this verdant realm, the Bosmer have developed customs that reflect their profound spiritual connection to the forest and their unwavering adherence to the Green Pact, the sacred covenant with Y'ffre that governs every aspect of Wood Elf society and shapes their unique approach to survival in one of Tamriel's most challenging environments. The Green Pact represents far more than a simple prohibition against harming plant life. It constitutes a comprehensive worldview that defines the Bosmer relationship with nature while establishing the fundamental principles that govern their society, economy, and spiritual practices. This ancient agreement, forged between Y'ffre and the first Bosmer during the chaotic period following the Dawn Era, transformed the Wood Elves from their original state into their current form, while binding them to specific obligations that affect every decision they make regarding food, shelter, tools, and interaction with their forest environment. The dietary restrictions imposed by the Green Pact create one of the most distinctive aspects of Bosmer culture, requiring them to obtain all sustenance from animal sources, while strictly forbidding the consumption of any plant matter grown within Valenwood's borders. This carnivorous lifestyle extends beyond simple meat consumption to encompass a comprehensive utilization of animal products that includes drinking blood, consuming organ meats, and using every portion of their prey to avoid waste. The Bosmer have developed sophisticated preservation techniques that allow them to maintain adequate nutrition throughout seasonal variations in game availability while honoring their commitment to the Green Pact's requirements. Traditional Bosmer hunting parties operate according to protocols that balance practical necessity with spiritual obligation, ensuring that their activities serve both nutritional needs and religious observance. These hunting expeditions typically involve small groups of experienced hunters who possess intimate knowledge of local animal populations, migration patterns, and the subtle signs that indicate the best opportunities for successful hunts. The composition of hunting parties reflects the collaborative nature of Bosmer society, with participants selected based on complementary skills rather than rigid hierarchical structures. The preparation for major hunting expeditions begins days in advance with purification rituals that supposedly align the hunter's spiritual essence with the natural rhythms of the forest while seeking Y'ffre's blessing for their activities. These preparatory ceremonies involve fasting periods during which participants consume only water and previously preserved animal products, meditation sessions conducted in forest clearings that provide direct contact with the natural environment, and the application of ceremonial paints made from animal blood and mineral pigments that supposedly enhance the hunter's ability to move undetected through dense vegetation. The actual hunting techniques employed by Bosmer parties emphasize stealth, patience, and the use of specialized equipment crafted from materials that comply with Green Pact restrictions. Bosmer hunters favor bows constructed from horn, bone, and sinew rather than wood, creating weapons that possess exceptional flexibility and power while avoiding any violation of their religious obligations. The arrows used in these hunts feature points carved from animal bone or imported metals, with fletching made from bird feathers and binding materials derived from animal sinews or imported plant fibers. The tracking skills developed by Bosmer hunters represent generations of accumulated knowledge about animal behavior, forest conditions, and the subtle environmental indicators that reveal the presence and movement of potential prey. These skills include the ability to identify individual animals from their tracks, determine the age and condition of sign left by passing creatures, and predict animal movements based on factors such as weather conditions, seasonal changes, and the availability of food and water sources. The spiritual aspects of Bosmer hunting practices involve constant communication with Y'ffre and the forest spirits that supposedly govern the behavior of animals and the success of hunting activities. Hunters offer prayers before beginning their stalks, seeking permission to take the lives necessary for their survival, while promising to honor the spirits of their prey through proper utilization of all parts of the animals they kill. These prayers follow traditional formulae that acknowledge the interconnected nature of all life within the forest, while requesting guidance in making clean kills that minimize suffering. The wild hunt represents the most extreme and terrifying manifestation of Bosmer spiritual power, a transformation ritual that dissolves the boundaries between civilization and primal nature while unleashing forces that can reshape entire regions of Valenwood. This ancient practice, reserved for times of extreme crisis or threat to the Bosmer people, involves the voluntary abandonment of physical form by entire communities, allowing them to become shapeless forces of destruction that consume everything in their path until the threat that triggered the transformation has been eliminated. The decision to invoke the wild hunt requires unanimous consent from all affected communities, as the transformation process is irreversible and results in the permanent loss of individual identity for all participants. The deliberations leading to such decisions involve extensive consultation with tribal elders, spiritual leaders, and representatives from multiple Bosmer settlements, with particular emphasis on exploring all possible alternatives before committing to such a drastic course of action. The ritual preparation for the wild hunt begins with the systematic destruction of all permanent structures and possessions that tie the participants to their civilized existence, creating a symbolic and practical severing of connections to their previous lives. Community members burn their homes, tools, and personal belongings while consuming the last of their preserved food supplies, leaving nothing behind that might anchor their consciousness to individual identity during the transformation process. The actual transformation ritual occurs during carefully timed ceremonies that exploit specific astronomical conditions and natural phenomena that supposedly enhance the effectiveness of the process. Participants gather in sacred groves where ancient stones mark locations of particular spiritual significance, forming circles that encompass entire communities while chanting formulae that gradually dissolve the barriers between individual consciousness and collective will. The physical transformation begins with the loss of fixed form as participants' bodies become fluid and changeable, allowing them to assume shapes that serve the destructive purposes of the wild hunt. These transformed beings possess capabilities that far exceed normal Bosmer abilities, including the power to move through solid obstacles, assume the forms of various creatures, and manipulate natural forces to serve their objectives. The collective consciousness that emerges from the transformation process retains the memories and motivations of the original participants, while operating according to an alien logic that prioritizes the elimination of threats above all other considerations. The aftermath of wild hunt events typically leaves vast areas of Valenwood permanently altered, with landscapes reshaped by the unleashed forces and ecosystems transformed in ways that reflect the supernatural nature of the events that occurred. These altered regions often become places of pilgrimage for other Bosmer communities, serving as reminders of the terrible power that their people can unleash when circumstances require such extreme measures. The unique architectural traditions of the Bosmer reflect their commitment to living in harmony with the forest environment while avoiding any violation of the Green Pact's prohibitions against harming plant life. Rather than constructing buildings from cut timber or other plant materials, the wood elves have developed techniques for shaping living trees into structures that serve their residential and community needs, while maintaining the health and vitality of the plants that provide their shelter. The process of creating tree homes begins with the selection of appropriate specimens that possess the size, health, and growth characteristics necessary for architectural modification. Bosmer tree shapers, specialists who combine horticultural knowledge with magical ability, evaluate potential candidates based on factors such as species characteristics, root system stability, proximity to water sources, and compatibility with neighboring trees that might be incorporated into larger structural complexes. The actual shaping process involves a combination of careful pruning, magical encouragement of specific growth patterns, and the installation of support structures made from materials that comply with Green Pact restrictions. Tree shapers use techniques passed down through generations of practitioners to encourage branches to grow in desired directions, create hollow spaces within trunks for living areas, and establish connections between multiple trees that form integrated architectural complexes. The magical aspects of tree shaping involve spells and rituals that supposedly communicate with the tree's essential spirits, requesting their cooperation in the modification process while ensuring that the changes serve the tree's long-term health and survival. These magical practices require deep understanding of plant biology, forest ecology, and the spiritual principles that govern the relationship between Bosmer and their forest environment. The time required for tree shaping projects varies considerably depending on the complexity of the desired structures and the growth characteristics of the trees involved, with simple modifications requiring several years to complete and elaborate architectural complexes, potentially taking decades to reach full maturity. This extended timeline requires careful planning and community commitment to projects that may not reach completion within the lifetimes of those who initiate them. The interior spaces created through tree shaping techniques provide comfortable living environments that maintain appropriate temperature and humidity levels while offering protection from weather and potential threats. These spaces typically feature curved walls that follow the natural growth patterns of the trees, with openings positioned to provide ventilation and natural lighting while maintaining structural integrity. The floors of tree homes are often formed from specially encouraged root growth or constructed from imported stone and metal materials that avoid Green Pact violations. The community ceremonies involved in tree shaping projects serve both practical and spiritual functions, bringing together multiple families and specialists while reinforcing the social bonds that enable such long-term collaborative efforts. These ceremonies mark important milestones in the shaping process, celebrate successful completions of major structural elements, and provide opportunities for community members to contribute their labor and expertise to projects that benefit the entire settlement. Seasonal festivals throughout Vollenwood celebrate the cyclical changes that govern forest life while reinforcing the Bosmer connection to the natural world and their obligations under the Green Pact. These celebrations typically coincide with significant environmental events such as the migration of animal species, the flowering of important plant species, or astronomical phenomena that supposedly influence forest conditions and animal behavior. The Spring Awakening Festival marks the end of winter dormancy and the beginning of increased animal activity that provides new hunting opportunities for Bosmer communities. This celebration involves elaborate ceremonies that honor Yafri's role in maintaining the forest's vitality while requesting continued abundance of game animals throughout the coming year. The festival preparations include the creation of ceremonial costumes made from animal hides and feathers, the preparation of special foods using preserved meats and imported plant materials, and the construction of temporary structures that serve as venues for community gatherings and competitions. The ceremonial activities during Spring Awakening festivals include ritual hunts that demonstrate community hunting skills while providing fresh meat for festival feasts, competitions in various traditional skills such as archery and tracking, and storytelling sessions that preserve oral traditions regarding Bosmer history and mythology. These activities serve both entertainment and educational purposes, strengthening community bonds while transmitting cultural knowledge to younger generations. The Summer Abundance Festival celebrates the peak of animal activity and the optimal hunting conditions that characterize the warmest months of the year. This festival emphasizes gratitude for the forest's generosity while acknowledging the responsibilities that accompany the Bosmer's privileged position within the natural order. The celebrations typically feature elaborate feasts that showcase the community's hunting success, demonstrations of food preservation techniques that ensure adequate supplies during leaner periods, and ceremonies that honor the spirits of animals that have provided sustenance throughout the year. The Autumn Preparation Festival marks the beginning of seasonal changes that require increased hunting activity and careful resource management to ensure community survival through the winter months. This celebration combines practical activities, such as the organization of major hunting expeditions, with spiritual observances that seek Yafri's protection during the challenging months ahead. The festival activities typically include the blessing of hunting equipment, the performance of divination rituals that supposedly predict winter conditions and game availability, and community planning sessions that coordinate resource sharing and mutual support arrangements. The Winter Reflection Festival occurs during the coldest months when hunting becomes more difficult and communities rely heavily on preserved foods and careful resource management. This celebration emphasizes introspection, community solidarity, and the maintenance of spiritual connections that sustain Bosmer culture during periods of physical hardship. The festival activities typically include extended storytelling sessions that preserve cultural traditions, craft activities that create useful items from available materials, and meditation practices that supposedly strengthen the community's spiritual connection to Yafri and the forest environment. The role of spinners within Bosmer society creates unique ceremonial traditions that blend historical preservation with active magical practice, as these storytellers serve both as keepers of cultural memory and as practitioners of narrative magic that can influence reality through the power of properly told stories. Spinners undergo extensive training that encompasses not only the memorization of vast amounts of traditional lore, but also the development of magical abilities that allow them to weave protective enchantments, healing spells, and other beneficial effects into their storytelling performances. The selection of potential spinners typically occurs during childhood when individuals demonstrate exceptional memory abilities, natural storytelling talent, and the capacity for the magical sensitivity necessary for narrative spellcasting. These candidates begin their training through apprenticeships with established spinners, learning the fundamental techniques of memory enhancement, voice projection, and the basic principles of story magic that form the foundation of their future practice. The training process for spinners involves the gradual memorization of increasingly complex story cycles that preserve different aspects of Bosmer history, mythology, and cultural knowledge. These stories are not merely entertainment, but serve as repositories of practical information about hunting techniques, forest navigation, plant and animal identification, and the proper observance of religious obligations. The most advanced spinners master story cycles that contain thousands of individual tales, each precisely memorized and capable of being adapted to specific circumstances and audiences. The magical aspects of spinner training involve learning to infuse storytelling performances with subtle enchantments that enhance the story's effectiveness while providing practical benefits to listeners. These magical techniques include healing narratives that supposedly accelerate recovery from injuries or illnesses, protective stories that create temporary wards against supernatural threats, and guidance tales that provide supernatural assistance with navigation or decision-making. The public performances given by spinners serve multiple functions within Bosmer communities, providing entertainment while transmitting cultural knowledge and offering magical services that support community welfare. These performances typically occur during evening gatherings when community members have completed their daily activities and can devote attention to extended storytelling sessions. The settings for these performances are carefully chosen to enhance the magical effectiveness of the stories while providing comfortable environments for extended listening. The jagged peaks of the Rithgarian Mountains rise like broken teeth against the northern sky, their snow-capped summits concealing valleys where the Orsimer have carved out their existence, according to traditions, as unyielding as the stone they shape with hammer and forge. Within these remote strongholds, scattered across treacherous mountain passes and hidden gorges, the Orcs maintain a society governed by the Code of Malakath, where strength determines leadership, honor guides conduct, and the rhythmic pounding of hammers against anvils echoes through stone halls like the heartbeat of an ancient and enduring civilization. The Code of Malakath serves as both legal framework and spiritual foundation for Orsimer society, establishing principles that govern everything from succession disputes to marriage customs, while reflecting the harsh realities of survival in environments where weakness means death and strength earns respect. This code, passed down through generations of tribal memory and reinforced through daily practice, emphasizes personal accountability, collective responsibility, and the constant testing of individuals against the challenges that define Orcish existence in their mountain strongholds. The succession traditions within Orsimer strongholds operate according to principles that prioritize proven capability over hereditary claims, requiring potential leaders to demonstrate their worthiness through combat trials that test not only physical prowess, but also tactical intelligence, leadership ability, and commitment to the stronghold's welfare. When a chief dies or becomes incapable of fulfilling their duties, the Code of Malakath mandates a period of formal challenge during which any qualified orc may contest for leadership by defeating the current heir or other claimants in ritualized combat that determines the new hierarchy through strength of arms. These succession battles take place in specially designated combat circles carved into the stone floors of stronghold courtyards, with raised platforms surrounding the fighting area to accommodate witnesses whose presence ensures the legitimacy of the proceedings. The combat circles themselves bear carved symbols that represent Malakath's authority and the binding nature of the trials conducted within them, creating sacred spaces where the outcomes of individual combat determine the fate of entire communities. The stone surfaces of these circles show the wear of countless battles, their surfaces polished smooth by generations of combat, while dark stains mark locations where blood has soaked into the rock over decades of use. The weapons permitted in succession battles follow traditional restrictions that ensure fairness while maintaining the ceremonial significance of the combat. Participants typically fight using matched sets of traditional Orcish weapons provided by the Stronghold's armory, with choices limited to axes, maces, and swords that represent the primary tools of Orcish warfare. The weapons themselves are often heirloom pieces that have been used in previous succession battles, their blades bearing the nicks and scratches that tell stories of past conflicts, while their handles show the wear patterns created by generations of warriors who have wielded them in moments that determined their community's futures. The combat itself follows specific protocols that distinguish succession battles from ordinary duels or training exercises, with participants required to demonstrate not only their ability to defeat opponents, but also their capacity to show appropriate respect for fallen enemies and proper conduct toward those who yield. The battles continue until one participant either dies, suffers injuries that prevent further combat, or formally acknowledges defeat through ritualized surrender gestures that preserve their honor while ending the contest. Winners are expected to show magnanimity toward defeated opponents, often incorporating capable former rivals into their leadership structure rather than treating them as enemies to be eliminated. The role of the chief's wives within Orsimer strongholds extends far beyond domestic responsibilities to encompass significant political, economic, and spiritual functions that make them essential partners in stronghold governance rather than mere dependents or status symbols. The Code of Malakath recognizes the chief's wives as holding distinct positions within the stronghold hierarchy, with each wife typically assuming responsibility for specific aspects of community management, such as food distribution, craft production, religious observances, or the training of young orcs in essential skills. The selection of wives by stronghold chiefs involves careful consideration of factors that extend beyond personal attraction to include the potential bride's family connections, specialized skills, and ability to contribute to the stronghold's overall strength and prosperity. Marriage negotiations between chiefs and prospective wives' families often resemble diplomatic treaties, with detailed discussions of dowries, mutual obligations, and the specific roles the new wife will assume within the stronghold's social structure. These negotiations may continue for months as both sides evaluate the potential benefits and risks of the proposed alliance. The marriage ceremonies that formalize these unions combine elements of personal commitment with public declarations of the new relationships being established between families and strongholds. The ceremonies typically take place in the stronghold's main hall during evening gatherings that bring together all community members to witness the vows being exchanged and the formal integration of the new wife into the chief's household. The rituals involve the exchange of gifts that demonstrate the economic value of the marriage alliance, the recitation of genealogies that establish the family connections being created, and the performance of traditional songs that celebrate the union while invoking Malakath's blessing on the new relationship. The daily responsibilities assumed by chiefs' wives require them to develop expertise in multiple areas of stronghold management, while maintaining the diplomatic skills necessary for mediating disputes and coordinating activities between different family groups. Senior wives often serve as advisors to their husbands on matters involving community welfare, resource allocation, and strategic planning, with their counsel carrying significant weight in decisions that affect the entire stronghold. The most experienced wives may assume roles similar to deputy chiefs, taking responsibility for major aspects of stronghold governance, while their husbands focus on military leadership and external relations. The exile traditions mandated by the Code of Malakath for defeated leaders create one of the most distinctive and harsh aspects of Orsimer society, requiring former chiefs who lose their positions through combat challenges to leave their strongholds permanently and seek new lives elsewhere. These exile requirements serve multiple purposes within Orcish culture, preventing the formation of rival power centers within strongholds, while ensuring that defeated leaders cannot undermine their successors' authority through continued presence and influence among community members who might remain loyal to the previous regime. The process of exile begins immediately following a chief's defeat in succession combat, with the newly victorious leader formally pronouncing the exile sentence according to traditional formulae that invoke Malakath's authority while specifying the terms and conditions of the banishment. Defeated chiefs typically have a brief period, usually measured in days rather than weeks, to gather their personal possessions and make arrangements for their departure. During this transition period, they lose all authority within the stronghold while retaining certain protections that prevent their treatment as common criminals or enemies. The possessions that exiled chiefs may take with them are limited to personal items such as weapons, armor, tools, and a modest amount of supplies sufficient for initial survival outside the stronghold. They cannot claim any portion of the stronghold's collective wealth, livestock, or strategic resources, ensuring that their departure does not weaken the community's overall capabilities. Family members of exiled chiefs face difficult choices regarding whether to accompany the exile or remain within the stronghold under the new leadership, with most choosing to stay rather than face the uncertainties of life outside their traditional community. The destinations available to exiled chiefs vary considerably depending on their personal connections, skills, and willingness to adapt to different circumstances. Some seek acceptance in other Orcish strongholds, where their experience and abilities might earn them positions within existing hierarchies, though such acceptance is never guaranteed and often requires proving their worth through service or combat. Others choose to establish new strongholds in unclaimed territories, gathering followers from among displaced orcs or younger warriors seeking opportunities for advancement that might not be available in established communities. The psychological and social challenges faced by exiled chiefs reflect the fundamental disruption of identity that occurs when individuals who have defined themselves through leadership roles suddenly find themselves without status, community, or clear purpose. Many exiles struggle with depression, anger, and a sense of purposelessness that can persist for years as they attempt to rebuild their lives in unfamiliar circumstances. The most successful exiles are those who can adapt their leadership skills to new contexts while accepting the reality of their changed circumstances rather than dwelling on past defeats or harboring resentments that prevent forward progress. Traditional Orsimer crafting ceremonies transform the practical necessity of creating tools and weapons into spiritual observances that honor Malakath while reinforcing the cultural values that define Orcish identity. These ceremonies, conducted in the forges and workshops that occupy central positions within every stronghold, combine technical instruction with religious ritual to create learning experiences that transmit both practical skills and cultural knowledge to each new generation of Orcish craftsmen. The forging of weapons represents the most sacred and elaborate of these crafting ceremonies, involving multi-day processes that begin with the selection and preparation of raw materials and culminate in the creation of finished weapons that supposedly carry Malakath's blessing along with their creator's skill and dedication. The ceremonies surrounding weapon creation emphasize the spiritual significance of the tools that orcs use to defend themselves and their communities, treating the forging process as a form of prayer that demonstrates the craftsman's devotion while creating instruments that serve both practical and symbolic functions. The preparation phase of weapon forging ceremonies involves the careful selection of iron ore and other materials based on their quality, source, and supposed spiritual properties. Master smiths evaluate potential materials through visual inspection, testing procedures that assess their working characteristics, and sometimes divination rituals that supposedly reveal the spiritual suitability of different options. The selected materials undergo purification processes that involve heating, cleaning, and the application of substances that supposedly remove impurities while enhancing the metal's receptiveness to magical and spiritual influences. The actual forging process follows traditional sequences that have been refined through generations of practice while maintaining their ceremonial significance. The work typically begins before dawn with the lighting of forge fires using specially prepared fuel that burns with particular characteristics considered favorable for weapon creation. The smith and any assistants undergo purification rituals that involve washing with blessed water, donning clean clothing, and consuming foods that supposedly enhance their spiritual connection to Malakath and their sensitivity to the subtle forces involved in creating blessed weapons. The rhythmic hammering that characterizes the forging process serves both practical and spiritual purposes, shaping the heated metal while creating sound patterns that supposedly communicate with Malakath and invoke his presence during the creation process. Experienced smiths develop distinctive hammering rhythms that reflect their personal styles while conforming to traditional patterns that have proven effective in creating high-quality weapons. The sound of multiple hammers working simultaneously in a stronghold's forge creates complex rhythmic patterns that can be heard throughout the community, serving as constant reminders of the productive activity that sustains Orcish civilization. The spiritual significance of working with metal and stone extends beyond weapon creation to encompass all forms of craftsmanship that involve the transformation of raw materials into useful objects. Orcish craftsmen view their work as participation in Malakath's ongoing creation of the world, with each act of shaping, joining, or finishing representing a small contribution to the divine plan that governs existence. This spiritual understanding of craftsmanship creates attitudes toward work that emphasize quality, dedication, and respect for materials rather than mere efficiency or profit maximization. The training of young orcs in traditional crafting techniques involves apprenticeships that combine practical instruction with spiritual education, teaching students to understand both the technical requirements of their chosen crafts and the religious significance of their activities. Master craftsmen select apprentices based on demonstrated aptitude, personal character, and commitment to learning, with the selection process often involving extended observation periods during which potential students prove their dedication through consistent effort and respectful behavior. The relationship between master and apprentice in Orcish crafting traditions resembles family bonds more than simple employment arrangements, with masters assuming responsibility for their students' moral and spiritual development alongside their technical education. Apprentices typically live within their master's households, participating in family activities while learning their trades through direct observation and gradually increasing levels of hands-on practice. The training process may continue for several years, with advancement depending on demonstrated competence rather than predetermined timeframes. The social structure within orc strongholds operates according to principles that balance individual achievement with collective welfare, creating hierarchical systems that reward merit while maintaining the cooperation necessary for survival in challenging mountain environments. These social arrangements reflect the practical requirements of stronghold life, while reinforcing the cultural values that define orcish identity and distinguish their communities from other societies throughout Tamriel. The roles of wise women within stronghold society encompass responsibilities that extend far beyond the domestic sphere to include spiritual leadership, medical care, education, and the preservation of cultural traditions through oral history and ritual practice. These women, typically older individuals who have demonstrated exceptional knowledge and judgment over many years of community service, occupy positions of significant influence that complement rather than compete with the military leadership provided by chiefs and their warriors. Wise women typically assume responsibility for the spiritual welfare of stronghold communities, conducting religious ceremonies, maintaining shrines dedicated to Malakath, and providing guidance on matters involving supernatural threats or divine displeasure. Their religious authority derives from their deep knowledge of traditional practices, their demonstrated ability to communicate with spiritual forces, and their reputation for wisdom in interpreting omens and signs that might affect community welfare. During times of crisis or uncertainty, wise women often serve as advisors to chiefs, providing counsel that draws upon their understanding of spiritual matters and their long experience with similar situations. The medical responsibilities of wise women include the treatment of injuries and illnesses using traditional remedies, surgical techniques, and healing rituals that combine practical medical knowledge with spiritual intervention. These women maintain extensive knowledge of herbal medicines, bone-setting procedures, wound treatment methods, and other medical techniques that have proven effective over generations of practice. Their medical training typically involves apprenticeships with established healers, during which they learn both the technical aspects of treatment and the spiritual principles that supposedly enhance the effectiveness of their interventions. The educational functions performed by wise women involve the instruction of young orcs in essential cultural knowledge, including traditional stories, religious practices, proper behavior patterns, and the historical background necessary for understanding their place within orcish society. These educational activities typically occur during evening gatherings when community members have completed their daily work and can devote attention to learning and cultural transmission. The instruction methods emphasize memorization, repetition, and practical application rather than abstract theoretical understanding. The training of young warriors within stronghold communities follows structured programs that combine physical conditioning, weapons instruction, tactical education, and character development to produce individuals capable of defending their communities while upholding the values that define orcish culture. This training begins in childhood with basic exercises designed to develop strength, coordination, and endurance, gradually progressing to more advanced instruction in specific combat techniques and military tactics as students demonstrate readiness for increased challenges. The physical conditioning component of warrior training emphasizes the development of functional strength and endurance rather than mere size or appearance, with exercises designed to prepare young orcs for the demands of combat in mountainous terrain while carrying heavy equipment over long distances. Training activities include running up steep mountain slopes while wearing armor, carrying heavy loads over extended distances, and engaging in wrestling matches that develop grappling skills while building physical toughness and mental resilience. Weapons instruction begins with basic techniques using practice weapons made from wood or blunted metal, allowing students to learn proper form and develop muscle memory without the risks associated with live blades. The progression from practice weapons to actual combat equipment occurs gradually as students demonstrate competence and responsibility, with each advancement marked by ceremonies that acknowledge their growing capabilities while emphasizing the serious responsibilities that accompany the ability to wield deadly weapons effectively. The coming-of-age trials that mark the transition from youth to adult status within Orcish society involve comprehensive tests that evaluate not only combat ability, but also judgment, courage, and commitment to community welfare. These trials typically occur when young orcs reach physical maturity and have completed their basic training, though the exact timing depends on individual development and the assessment of their instructors regarding their readiness for adult responsibilities. The specific challenges included in coming-of-age trials vary between different strongholds and may be adjusted based on current circumstances and available opportunities, but typically include solo survival expeditions in the surrounding wilderness, combat tests against experienced warriors, and practical challenges that require the demonstration of essential skills such as tracking, crafting, or problem-solving under pressure. The trials are designed to push candidates to their limits while providing opportunities for them to demonstrate the qualities that stronghold communities value in their adult members. Orsimer religious practices center on the worship of Malakath through activities that emphasize strength, endurance, and the overcoming of adversity as expressions of devotion to the deity who represents the Orcish struggle against a hostile world. These practices combine formal ceremonies with daily observances that integrate religious devotion into every aspect of stronghold life, creating comprehensive spiritual frameworks that guide individual behavior while reinforcing community solidarity and shared identity. Combat trials conducted as religious observances serve multiple purposes within Orcish spiritual life, providing opportunities for individuals to demonstrate their devotion to Malakath while testing their abilities against worthy opponents in controlled environments that minimize the risk of permanent injury or death. These trials typically occur during religious festivals or at times when the community faces particular challenges that require divine intervention or guidance. The combat itself follows ritualized patterns that distinguish religious trials from ordinary training exercises or succession battles, with specific protocols governing weapon selection, victory conditions, and the treatment of participants. The preparation for religious combat trials involves purification rituals that supposedly align participants with Malakath's will while removing spiritual obstacles that might interfere with the trial's effectiveness as religious observances. These preparatory activities include fasting periods that supposedly enhance spiritual sensitivity, meditation sessions conducted in shrines dedicated to Malakath, and the application of ceremonial paints or markings that identify participants as engaged in religious rather than secular activities. Offerings made to Malakath typically consist of items that represent the fruits of Orcish labor and achievement, including weapons crafted by community smiths, portions of successful hunts, and valuable materials obtained through trade or conquest. These offerings are presented at shrines maintained within stronghold complexes, with the presentation ceremonies following traditional protocols that emphasize the giver's respect for Malakath while requesting continued divine protection and guidance for their communities. The maintenance of tribal totems and ancestral weapons creates ongoing religious obligations that connect contemporary orcs to their historical heritage, while preserving physical symbols of their cultural identity and spiritual beliefs. These artifacts, which may include weapons used by legendary warriors, carved representations of important ancestors, or objects associated with significant events in stronghold history, require regular care and attention that serves both practical and spiritual purposes. The care of ancestral weapons involves cleaning, oiling, and minor repairs that preserve the artifact's physical condition while demonstrating continued respect for the individuals who originally wielded them. These maintenance activities typically occur during religious ceremonies that acknowledge the weapon's significance while invoking the protection and guidance of their former owners. The weapons themselves are often displayed in positions of honor within stronghold halls, serving as constant reminders of the achievements and sacrifices that have preserved Orcish communities through generations of challenges and conflicts. The twin moons Joan and Jode cast their silvered light across the vast deserts and dense jungles of Elsewhere, their eternal dance determining not merely the passage of time, but the very nature of existence for the Khajiit people. Within the adobe walls of Rimmond's merchant quarters, and beneath the swaying palms of Central's coastal markets, the cat folk conduct their lives according to lunar rhythms that have governed their society since the first Khajiit emerged from the primordial forests during the Dawn Era. These traditions, as intricate as the patterns woven into their finest silks, reflect a civilization that views the moons not as distant celestial bodies, but as active participants in the cosmic order that shapes every aspect of Khajiit existence. The significance of Joan and Jode in determining Khajiit firstocks extends far beyond simple biological classification, encompassing a complex system of spiritual beliefs and social structures that recognize the moon's phases at birth as determining not only physical form, but also personality traits, social roles, and spiritual destinies. The Khajiit understanding of lunar influence operates according to principles that integrate astronomical observation with religious doctrine, creating comprehensive frameworks for interpreting the relationship between celestial phenomena and mortal existence that guide everything from individual life choices to major political decisions. The 17 recognized firstocks represent distinct variations in Khajiit physiology and psychology, each associated with specific combinations of lunar phases that supposedly determine the characteristics manifested by individuals born under those conditions. The Cathay, born when Joan is full and Jode is waning, typically display the balanced proportions and moderate temperament that make them well suited for roles requiring diplomatic skill and social coordination. Their height, generally comparable to imperial humans, allows them to interact comfortably with other races, while their natural agility and keen senses provide advantages in activities requiring precision and awareness. The Cathay rot, emerging when both moons show full faces, grow larger and more physically imposing than their Cathay cousins, while retaining similar intellectual capabilities and social adaptability. These Khajiit often assume leadership roles within their communities, their impressive physical presence reinforcing their authority, while their inherited diplomatic skills enable them to navigate the complex relationships that characterize Khajiit society. The ceremonies surrounding Cathay rot births involve elaborate celebrations that acknowledge the auspicious lunar conditions while invoking blessings for the child's future success in whatever endeavors they may pursue. The Suthay represent perhaps the most numerous of the firstocks, born when Joan is waning and Jode shows her full face. These Khajiit display the smaller stature and more feline characteristics that many outsiders consider typical of their race, though their intelligence and cultural sophistication equal that of any other firstock. Suthay communities often specialize in activities that exploit their natural agility and stealth capabilities, including hunting, scouting, and various forms of entertainment that showcase their acrobatic abilities and natural grace. The birth ceremonies conducted for different firstocks follow protocols that reflect both the specific characteristics associated with each lunar combination and the broader cultural values that define Khajiit society. These ceremonies typically occur within days of birth, when the infant's firstock has become clearly apparent and the family can begin planning for their child's future role within the community. The rituals involve the participation of lunar priests who specialize in interpreting the astrological significance of birth timing, midwives who understand the medical aspects of different firstock characteristics, and family members who contribute their knowledge of ancestral traditions and social expectations. The preparation for birth ceremonies begins during pregnancy as expectant parents consult with lunar priests to understand the potential implications of different birth timings and prepare for the specific needs that may arise depending on their child's eventual firstock. These consultations involve detailed discussions of lunar calendars, family histories, and the practical considerations that affect child rearing within different firstock communities. The priests provide guidance on dietary requirements, educational approaches, and social preparation that will help families support their children's development according to their inherent characteristics and potential. The actual ceremony involves the formal presentation of the infant to representatives of their firstock community, with rituals that acknowledge their place within the broader social structure while invoking divine protection for their future development. The ceremonies typically include the application of ceremonial markings that identify the child's first stock and birth circumstances, the presentation of gifts that reflect their anticipated needs and interests, and the recitation of traditional blessings that connect them to the accumulated wisdom and protection of their ancestors. The role of lunar priests in conducting these ceremonies requires extensive training in astronomical observation, religious doctrine, and the practical knowledge necessary for providing guidance to families navigating the complexities of first-stock-specific child rearing. These priests maintain detailed records of birth timings and their associated outcomes, creating databases of information that help them provide increasingly accurate predictions and advice to expectant parents. Their training involves years of study in specialized schools that combine theoretical instruction with practical experience in ceremony conduct and family counseling. Traditional Khajiit merchant customs reflect the culture's deep integration of commercial activity with religious observance, creating business practices that treat trade not merely as economic exchange, but as spiritual activity that requires divine blessing and careful attention to cosmic influences. The blessing of caravans represents one of the most important of these customs, involving elaborate ceremonies that seek protection for merchants and their goods, while ensuring that commercial ventures proceed according to principles that honor both practical necessity and spiritual obligation. The preparation for caravan blessing ceremonies begins weeks before departure, as merchants gather the materials and arrange for the services necessary to conduct proper rituals. These preparations involve the acquisition of specific incense varieties that supposedly attract favorable attention from protective deities, the commissioning of protective amulets and talismans from skilled craftsmen, and the coordination of schedules to ensure that the blessing ceremonies occur during lunar phases considered most favorable for the intended journey and commercial objectives. The blessing ceremonies themselves typically take place in temple courtyards or specially designated areas within merchant districts, with the caravans arranged in formations that allow priests and participants to move freely around the wagons and pack animals while conducting the various ritual activities. The ceremonies begin before dawn with purification rituals that cleanse the merchants, their employees, and their goods of any spiritual contamination that might attract misfortune during the journey. These purification activities involve the burning of specific incense blends, the sprinkling of blessed water on wagons and merchandise, and the recitation of prayers that invoke divine protection against the various dangers that threaten travelers in elsewhere's challenging environment. The central portion of the blessing ceremony involves the formal consecration of the caravan and its contents through rituals that supposedly imbue them with protective properties, while ensuring that the commercial activities conducted during the journey will proceed according to divine will. The priests conducting these ceremonies apply blessed oils to wagon wheels, harness fittings, and other equipment that plays crucial roles in transportation, while reciting formulae that invoke specific deities associated with travel, commerce, and protection. The merchants themselves participate by making offerings that demonstrate their commitment to conducting their business according to traditional principles, while requesting divine assistance in achieving their commercial objectives. The protocols governing trade routes throughout elsewhere incorporate both practical considerations regarding safety and efficiency and spiritual requirements that ensure commercial activities proceed according to cosmic influences and divine favor. These protocols, developed through centuries of merchant experience and refined through ongoing consultation with lunar priests and other religious authorities, create comprehensive frameworks for conducting trade that balance commercial success with spiritual obligation and social responsibility. The selection of travel routes involves careful consideration of factors that include seasonal weather patterns, political conditions in different regions, the availability of water and supplies at various stopping points, and the lunar phases that will occur during different portions of the journey. Experienced caravan masters maintain detailed knowledge of these factors, while consulting with specialists who can provide current information about conditions along potential routes. The decision-making process often involves complex calculations that weigh commercial opportunities against various risks, while considering the spiritual implications of different timing and routing choices. The stopping points established along major trade routes serve multiple functions within the broader network of commercial and spiritual activity that characterizes Khajiit merchant culture. These locations, which may range from simple camping areas with basic facilities to elaborate caravanserai that provide comprehensive services for travelers, typically include shrines or temples where merchants can conduct religious observances while resting and resupplying. The maintenance of these facilities requires ongoing cooperation between merchant organizations, religious authorities, and local communities, creating networks of mutual obligation and support that strengthen the overall infrastructure supporting long-distance trade. The role of traditional deities in Khajiit commerce extends beyond simple requests for protection and good fortune to encompass comprehensive spiritual frameworks that guide decision-making, relationship management, and the ethical conduct of business activities. The primary deities associated with merchant activities include aspects of traditional Khajiit gods who supposedly govern different aspects of commercial success, from the negotiation of favorable agreements to the protection of goods during transport and the maintenance of honest relationships with trading partners. Prayers to commercial deities typically follow formulaic patterns that acknowledge the deity's authority over specific aspects of trade, while requesting assistance with particular challenges or opportunities. These prayers may be offered at regular intervals during journeys, at crucial moments such as the beginning of important negotiations, or in response to unexpected difficulties that require divine intervention. The specific deities invoked depend on the nature of the assistance being sought, with different gods specializing in different aspects of commercial activity and requiring different types of offerings and observances. The offerings made to commercial deities often consist of portions of the goods being transported or profits earned through successful transactions, creating direct connections between commercial success and religious devotion. These offerings may be presented at roadside shrines, deposited at temples in major trading centers, or distributed to the poor and needy as acts of charity that supposedly earn divine favor. The timing and manner of these offerings follow traditional guidelines that consider factors such as the value of the goods involved, the nature of the divine assistance being sought, and the merchant's personal relationship with the deities being honored. The main's religious significance within Khajiit society creates unique ceremonial traditions that reflect the complex relationship between political authority and spiritual leadership that characterizes their civilization. The main, born only during the rare lunar alignment when both Joan and Jode appear dark, serves as both temporal ruler and spiritual guide for all Khajiit, their unique birth circumstances supposedly granting them special connections to divine forces that enable them to provide guidance and protection for their people during times of crisis and uncertainty. The selection process for identifying the main involves extensive consultation between lunar priests, tribal elders, and other religious authorities who must verify the astronomical conditions surrounding potential candidates' births while evaluating their personal characteristics and spiritual development. This process typically begins during childhood, when individuals born during appropriate lunar phases demonstrate the exceptional qualities that mark them as potential manes, including unusual wisdom, natural leadership ability, and the capacity for spiritual insight that enables them to understand and interpret divine will. The verification of a potential main's birth circumstances requires detailed astronomical records and the testimony of witnesses who can confirm the exact timing of their birth relative to the lunar phases. These investigations may involve extensive research into historical records, consultation with astronomical experts, and sometimes the use of divination techniques that supposedly reveal the truth about disputed birth circumstances. The process can take years to complete, particularly when multiple candidates claim legitimate rights to the position or when the astronomical records from the relevant time period are incomplete or contradictory. The coronation ceremonies that formally install a new main involve elaborate rituals that combine elements of political investiture with religious consecration, creating comprehensive ceremonies that acknowledge both the temporal authority and spiritual responsibilities associated with the position. These ceremonies typically take place in the most sacred locations within Khajiit territory, with representatives from all major tribes and first stock communities participating in rituals that demonstrate their acceptance of the new main's authority while invoking divine blessing for their reign. The preparation for main coronation ceremonies involves months of planning and coordination between different groups within Khajiit society, as the ceremonies must accommodate the diverse traditions and expectations of communities that may have significantly different cultural practices and political interests. The organizers must balance the need for impressive displays that demonstrate the main's importance with practical considerations regarding security, logistics, and the accommodation of large numbers of participants from across Elswire's vast territory. The actual coronation rituals follow ancient protocols that supposedly date back to the earliest periods of Khajiit civilization, incorporating elements that connect the new main to the accumulated wisdom and authority of their predecessors, while acknowledging their unique role within the cosmic order. These rituals typically include the presentation of sacred objects that symbolize different aspects of the main's authority, the recitation of genealogies that trace the spiritual lineage connecting all Manes throughout history, and the performance of ceremonies that supposedly transfer divine power from the cosmic forces to the individual being crowned. Seasonal celebrations tied to lunar cycles create comprehensive frameworks for community observance that integrate astronomical phenomena with agricultural activities, social bonding, and spiritual devotion. These celebrations, which occur throughout the year according to the complex patterns created by the interaction between Joan and Jode's orbital cycles, provide opportunities for Khajiit communities to reinforce their cultural identity while marking important transitions in the natural and social environments that shape their daily lives. The sugar festivals that celebrate the moon sugar harvest represent some of the most elaborate and widely observed of these seasonal celebrations, combining practical activities related to the gathering and processing of this crucial resource with religious observances that acknowledge its sacred significance within Khajiit culture. Moon sugar, harvested from the crystallized sap of certain plants that grow only under specific lunar conditions, serves both practical and spiritual purposes within Khajiit society, providing nutritional value while supposedly enhancing spiritual sensitivity and connection to divine forces. The timing of sugar festivals depends on the complex interactions between lunar phases, seasonal weather patterns, and the growth cycles of the plants that produce moon sugar, creating celebration schedules that vary from year to year while following overall patterns that experienced observers can predict with reasonable accuracy. The festivals typically begin when the sugar-producing plants reach optimal maturity under favorable lunar conditions, with the actual harvest activities coordinated to take advantage of the brief periods when the sugar content reaches its peak concentration. The harvest rituals that mark the beginning of sugar festivals involve elaborate ceremonies that honor the plants being harvested while seeking divine blessing for the workers who will gather and process the precious substance. These ceremonies typically include prayers to deities associated with agriculture and abundance, the application of blessed oils to harvesting tools and equipment, and the performance of traditional dances that supposedly encourage the plants to yield their maximum sugar content. The workers themselves undergo purification rituals that prepare them for the sacred activity of gathering moon sugar, while ensuring that their spiritual condition will not contaminate the substance they collect. The processing activities that follow the initial harvest involve community-wide efforts that transform the raw plant material into the refined moon sugar that serves so many important functions within Khajiit society. These activities require specialized knowledge and equipment that may be shared between different families and communities, creating opportunities for cooperation and social interaction that strengthen the bonds between different groups, while ensuring that the sugar processing proceeds efficiently and safely. The traditional storytelling gatherings that accompany many seasonal celebrations serve multiple functions within Khajiit culture, providing entertainment while preserving historical knowledge and transmitting cultural values to younger generations. These gatherings typically occur during evening hours when community members have completed their daily activities and can devote attention to the extended narratives that characterize Khajiit oral tradition. The stories themselves may range from historical accounts of important events to mythological tales that explain natural phenomena and moral fables that illustrate proper behavior and decision-making. The storytellers who conduct these gatherings occupy positions of significant respect within Khajiit communities. Their abilities to memorize vast amounts of traditional material while adapting their presentations to different audiences and circumstances, making them essential preservers of cultural knowledge. These individuals typically undergo extensive training that involves not only the memorization of traditional stories, but also the development of performance skills that enable them to engage audiences effectively while conveying the deeper meanings embedded within the narratives they present. The selection of stories for particular gatherings involves consideration of factors such as the audience composition, the specific celebration being observed, and current events or circumstances that might make certain narratives particularly relevant or meaningful. Experienced storytellers maintain extensive repertoires that enable them to choose appropriate materials while adapting familiar stories to address contemporary concerns or highlight particular lessons that their communities need to hear. The ancient histories rise from the murky waters of Black Marsh like living monuments to a consciousness that predates the arrival of men and Mer, their massive trunks disappearing into the perpetual mist that shrouds the deepest regions of the swampland. Within the shadow of these primordial giants, the Argonians have developed a civilization that defies the understanding of outsiders, where the boundaries between individual identity and collective consciousness blur like the shifting waters that define their homeland. The sacred relationship between the Saxhleel and their Hist guardians creates cultural practices that operate according to principles fundamentally different from those governing other races of Tamriel. The communion rituals that connect Argonians to their histories represent the most fundamental aspect of their spiritual and social existence, involving ceremonies that transcend simple religious observance to encompass direct communication with an intelligence that spans millennia. These rituals typically occur in sacred groves where ancient histories have grown to enormous proportions, their root systems extending for miles beneath the swamp, while their canopies create cathedral-like spaces filled with filtered light and the constant sound of dripping water. The preparation for these communion ceremonies requires extensive purification processes that align the participants' consciousness with the alien thought patterns of the Hist, while removing the mental barriers that normally separate individual awareness from collective experience. The sap drinking ceremonies that form the centerpiece of Hist communion involve the consumption of a viscous, amber-colored substance that flows from specialized organs within the tree's bark. This sap, which varies in potency and effects depending on the specific tree and the timing of its extraction, serves as both a physical sacrament and a psychoactive medium that enables direct neural connection between Argonian minds and the vast intelligence network maintained by the Hist collective. The extraction of sap for ceremonial use follows strict protocols that ensure the tree's continued health while maximizing the spiritual effectiveness of the substance being gathered. The process of sap extraction begins with elaborate rituals that request permission from the individual Hist tree while explaining the purpose for which the sap will be used. These preliminary ceremonies involve the application of specially prepared oils to the tree's bark, the recitation of traditional formulae that supposedly communicate the participants' intentions, and the performance of ritual gestures that demonstrate respect for the tree's ancient wisdom and power. The actual extraction occurs through carefully made incisions that allow the sap to flow without causing permanent damage to the tree's vital systems. The consumption of hist sap during communion ceremonies produces profound alterations in consciousness that enable participants to experience direct mental contact with the collective intelligence of the hist network. These altered states of awareness typically begin with a gradual dissolution of individual identity boundaries, allowing the participants' consciousness to merge with the vast, slow-moving thoughts of the hist collective. The experience varies considerably between individuals and circumstances, but commonly includes visions of past events stored within the hist memory network, prophetic glimpses of potential futures, and direct communication with other Argonians who are simultaneously participating in communion rituals at distant locations. The interpretation of visions and communications received during hist communion requires specialized knowledge and experience that shamans and other spiritual leaders develop through years of practice and study. These interpretations must account for the symbolic nature of much hist communication, the temporal distortions that affect prophetic visions, and the complex relationships between individual experiences and collective meanings. The most skilled interpreters can distinguish between personal psychological projections and genuine communications from the hist, while understanding how to apply the guidance received to practical decisions affecting their communities. The tribal structures that govern Argonian society reflect the influence of hist guidance on social organization, creating flexible hierarchies that can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the collective decision-making processes that the trees favor over individual authority. Unlike the rigid caste systems or hereditary nobility found in other cultures, Argonian leadership emerges through demonstrated ability to communicate effectively with the hist and translate their guidance into practical action that benefits the entire tribe. These leadership positions remain fluid, with individuals assuming greater or lesser authority depending on their current connection to the hist network and their effectiveness in addressing specific challenges. The role of shamans within Argonian tribal structures encompasses responsibilities that extend far beyond simple religious leadership to include diplomatic functions, medical care, and the preservation of cultural knowledge that might otherwise be lost during periods of social disruption. These individuals typically demonstrate exceptional sensitivity to hist communication from an early age, showing abilities that mark them for specialized training in the complex skills required for serving as intermediaries between their communities and the tree collective. The training process for shamans involves extended periods of isolation in deep swamp locations where they can develop their communion abilities without external distractions, while learning to interpret the subtle forms of guidance that the hist provide. Shamanic training begins with basic exercises designed to enhance sensitivity to the electromagnetic and chemical signals that the hist use for communication with their Argonian charges. These exercises involve meditation practices conducted in direct contact with hist root systems, breathing techniques that supposedly align the trainee's nervous system with the tree's bioelectric patterns, and dietary modifications that enhance receptivity to the psychoactive compounds found in hist sap. The progression through different levels of training depends on demonstrated ability to receive and interpret hist communications accurately, with advancement requiring the successful completion of increasingly complex communion rituals. The responsibilities assumed by fully trained shamans include the conduct of major tribal ceremonies, the interpretation of hist guidance regarding important decisions, and the maintenance of the sacred sites where communion rituals take place. These duties require not only spiritual sensitivity, but also practical knowledge of tribal politics, resource management, and the complex relationships between different Argonian communities scattered throughout Black Marsh's vast wilderness. Shamans must balance their roles as spiritual guides with their functions as practical advisors, often finding themselves involved in negotiations, strategic planning, and crisis management that requires both mystical insight and worldly wisdom. The decision-making processes used by Argonian tribes incorporate Hist guidance through elaborate consultation procedures that ensure important choices reflect the collective wisdom of both the tree network and the tribal community. These procedures typically begin with the presentation of specific questions or problems to shamans who conduct communion rituals designed to elicit relevant guidance from the Hist collective. The information received through these consultations is then interpreted and discussed within tribal councils that include representatives from different family groups and social functions, creating comprehensive decision-making processes that consider both spiritual and practical factors. The coming-of-age ceremonies that mark the transition from childhood to adult status within Argonian society involve transformative experiences that fundamentally alter the participants' physical and mental characteristics while establishing their permanent connection to the Hist collective. These ceremonies, which typically occur when young Argonians reach physical maturity, represent one of the most distinctive aspects of their culture, as the transformation process grants them the humanoid form and enhanced consciousness that distinguish adult Saxhleel from the more primitive lizard-like creatures they resemble during childhood. The preparation for coming-of-age ceremonies begins months in advance, as tribal shamans evaluate candidates for their readiness to undergo the transformation process, while gathering the specialized materials and conducting the preliminary rituals necessary for successful completion of the ceremony. This evaluation process involves extensive observation of the candidate's behavior, psychological development, and demonstrated ability to maintain stable mental states during exposure to mild doses of Hist sap. Only those individuals who show appropriate maturity and psychological stability are permitted to proceed with the full transformation ceremony, as the process can be dangerous or even fatal for those who are not adequately prepared. The transformation ritual itself involves the consumption of concentrated Hist sap that has been specially prepared through complex alchemical processes that enhance its transformative properties while reducing the risk of adverse reactions. This preparation typically requires several weeks of careful processing that involves multiple distillation cycles, the addition of specific catalytic agents, and exposure to particular environmental conditions that supposedly optimize the sap's effectiveness. The resulting substance possesses a potency far exceeding that used in ordinary communion ceremonies, creating effects that permanently alter the recipient's physiology and neural structure. The physical changes that occur during the transformation process involve the rapid development of more sophisticated nervous systems, enhanced cognitive capabilities, and the assumption of the bipedal posture and manual dexterity that characterize adult Argonians. These changes typically occur over a period of several days, during which the candidates remain in specialized chambers, where they can be monitored and assisted by experienced shamans who understand the various stages of the transformation process. The physical discomfort and disorientation associated with these rapid changes require careful management to prevent complications that might interfere with the successful completion of the ceremony. The psychological aspects of the transformation involve the development of enhanced self-awareness, improved memory capabilities, and the establishment of permanent neural pathways that enable ongoing communication with the Hist collective. These mental changes often prove more challenging than the physical alterations, as candidates must learn to integrate their expanded consciousness with their existing personality structures while adapting to the constant background presence of Hist communication. The most successful transformations result in individuals who maintain their personal identity while gaining access to the collective knowledge and wisdom of the tree network. The role of Hist sap in facilitating these transformations reflects the unique biochemical relationship between the trees and their Argonian partners, involving complex interactions between the sap's psychoactive compounds and the specific neural receptors that Argonians possess for processing these substances. The effectiveness of the transformation process depends on precise dosages, optimal timing, and the individual candidate's genetic and psychological characteristics, creating requirements for careful preparation and expert supervision that limit the ceremony's availability to those who have demonstrated appropriate readiness. The social integration that follows successful coming-of-age ceremonies involves extended periods during which newly transformed adults learn to function within their communities while adapting to their enhanced capabilities and responsibilities. This integration process typically includes mentorship relationships with experienced adults who provide guidance on managing the psychological challenges associated with constant HIST communication, training in the practical skills required for adult roles within tribal society, and gradual assumption of increasing responsibilities that allow new adults to demonstrate their readiness for full participation in community life. The unique Argonian approach to death and rebirth reflects their understanding of consciousness as a temporary manifestation of patterns that ultimately return to the collective intelligence maintained by the HIST network. This perspective creates funeral practices that emphasize the continuation of essential identity patterns rather than the preservation of individual consciousness, with ceremonies designed to facilitate the smooth transition of the deceased's accumulated knowledge and experiences back into the tree collective, where they can benefit future generations of Argonians. The preparation of deceased Argonians for their return to the HIST involves elaborate procedures that supposedly preserve the neural patterns and memory structures that contain their essential identity, while preparing their physical remains for integration with the root systems of nearby trees. These preparation procedures begin immediately upon death with the application of specialized preservatives that maintain the integrity of brain tissue and nervous system components during the extended rituals that precede final disposition. The preservatives themselves are derived from HIST sap and other swamp plants, creating chemical environments that supposedly facilitate the extraction and preservation of consciousness patterns. The ritual extraction of consciousness patterns from deceased Argonians requires the services of specially trained shamans who possess the sensitivity and technical knowledge necessary for conducting these delicate procedures. The extraction process involves the use of concentrated HIST sap as a medium for dissolving the boundaries between the deceased's neural patterns and the collective consciousness network, allowing the essential elements of their identity to flow into the tree system while leaving behind the physical structures that can no longer support individual awareness. These procedures must be completed within specific time limits to prevent the degradation of consciousness patterns that occurs as brain tissue deteriorates after death. The ceremonial aspects of Argonian funeral rites emphasize the temporary nature of individual existence while celebrating the contributions that the deceased made to their community and the ongoing collective consciousness that will preserve their essential identity. These ceremonies typically involve the participation of entire tribal communities, with different family groups and social organizations contributing specific elements to comprehensive rituals that honor the deceased while facilitating their transition back to the HIST collective. The ceremonies often include the recitation of the deceased's major accomplishments, the sharing of memories that illustrate their character and contributions, and the performance of traditional songs that supposedly guide their consciousness patterns toward successful integration with the tree network. The physical disposition of Argonian remains follows practices that ensure the complete integration of all biological materials with the swamp ecosystem, while providing appropriate nutrients for the HIST trees that will preserve the deceased's consciousness patterns. The bodies are typically placed in specially prepared locations within HIST groves, where the root systems can gradually absorb the decomposing organic matter, while the tree collective processes the consciousness patterns that have been extracted from the nervous system. These burial sites often become places of ongoing spiritual significance for the deceased's family and community members, serving as focal points for communion rituals that enable continued contact with the preserved consciousness patterns. The beliefs surrounding rebirth within Argonian culture recognize the possibility that consciousness patterns preserved within the Hist collective may eventually be reintegrated into new individual identities, creating forms of reincarnation that differ significantly from the concepts found in other religious traditions. This reintegration process supposedly occurs when the tree collective determines that specific consciousness patterns possess characteristics that would benefit new generations of Argonians, though the timing and selection criteria for such decisions remain mysteries that even the most experienced shamans cannot fully understand or predict. The evidence for rebirth phenomena includes reports of young Argonians who demonstrate knowledge or skills that they could not have acquired through normal learning processes, suggesting that they may have inherited consciousness patterns from deceased individuals whose identities have been preserved within the Hist network. These cases are carefully investigated by tribal shamans who attempt to verify the apparent connections while understanding their implications for the individuals involved and their communities. The most convincing cases involve specific knowledge of historical events, technical skills, or personal relationships that the young Argonians could not have learned through conventional means. The implications of rebirth beliefs for Argonian society include the development of educational practices that attempt to identify and nurture inherited consciousness patterns, while helping individuals integrate these inherited elements with their developing personal identities. These educational approaches recognize that reborn individuals may possess valuable knowledge and skills, while requiring careful guidance to prevent psychological conflicts between inherited patterns and contemporary personality development. The most successful cases result in individuals who can access inherited knowledge while maintaining stable personal identities that serve their community's current needs. The seasonal flooding cycles that characterize Black Marsh's environment create additional ceremonial opportunities that integrate natural phenomena with spiritual observances, as the rising and falling waters supposedly reflect the breathing patterns of the Hist collective and provide opportunities for enhanced communion with the tree network. These flood ceremonies involve community-wide activities that celebrate the renewal and cleansing effects of the seasonal waters, while seeking Hist guidance for the challenges and opportunities that each new cycle brings to tribal communities. The preparation for flood season ceremonies involves the construction of temporary platforms and floating structures that enable communities to maintain their ceremonial activities even when their normal gathering places become submerged beneath rising waters. These structures, built from materials that comply with Hist preferences and environmental requirements, provide stable platforms for conducting communion rituals while allowing participants to maintain direct contact with the floodwaters that supposedly carry enhanced concentrations of Hist-generated biochemical signals. The ritual activities conducted during flood seasons include specialized communion ceremonies that exploit the enhanced communication conditions created by the widespread water coverage, allowing shamans to establish contact with distant Hist groves and coordinate activities between widely separated tribal communities. These enhanced communication capabilities enable the sharing of important information, the coordination of responses to regional challenges, and the maintenance of cultural unity across the vast distances that separate different Argonian settlements throughout Black Marsh's extensive wilderness areas. The New Life Festival represents perhaps the most successful example of cultural adaptation and shared celebration across Tamriel's diverse provinces, demonstrating how imperial traditions can take root in foreign soil while evolving to reflect local customs and beliefs. What began as a distinctly Cyrodiilic observance, marking the transition between Evening Star and Morning Star, has transformed into a continent-wide celebration that maintains its core themes of renewal and community bonding, while incorporating elements that reflect the unique characteristics of each provincial culture. In the Nordic holds of Sky Rim, the New Life Festival blends seamlessly with ancient traditions surrounding the winter solstice and the symbolic death and rebirth of the sun. The celebration begins several days before the traditional imperial date, incorporating elements from the old Nordic festival of Sun's return that predates imperial influence by centuries. Nordic communities construct massive ice sculptures in their town squares, carved by skilled artisans who work through the bitter cold to create intricate representations of dragons, ancient heroes, and scenes from Nordic mythology. These frozen monuments serve as focal points for the festival activities while demonstrating the Nordic mastery over their harsh environment. The gift-giving traditions that characterize the Nordic version of New Life Festival emphasize practical items that demonstrate the giver's skill and consideration for the recipient's needs during the harsh winter months. Blacksmiths forge small tools and household implements that showcase their craftsmanship while providing useful additions to family workshops and kitchens. Hunters contribute preserved meats and furs that supplement winter food supplies while demonstrating their success in providing for their communities. The exchange of these practical gifts occurs during elaborate feasts held in mead halls throughout Skyrim, where entire communities gather to share food, drink, and stories that strengthen social bonds during the darkest months of the year. The religious aspects of the Nordic New Life Festival incorporate prayers to both imperial and traditional Nordic deities, creating syncretic ceremonies that acknowledge Akatosh's role in marking time's passage while honoring Kind's dominion over the winter winds and Shore's protection of Nordic communities. These blended religious observances reflect the pragmatic Nordic approach to cultural adaptation, accepting useful foreign elements while maintaining their essential cultural identity. The ceremonies typically occur in temples that feature altars dedicated to both imperial and Nordic gods, with priests conducting services that alternate between imperial liturgical forms and traditional Nordic chants. In Morrowind, the Dunmer adaptation of the New Life Festival creates fascinating tensions between imperial cultural influence and the deeply rooted traditions of tribunal worship and ancestral veneration. The festival occurs during a period when the Dunmer calendar already includes several important observances, requiring careful coordination to avoid conflicts with established religious and social obligations. Many Dunmer communities have resolved this challenge by incorporating New Life Festival elements into existing celebrations rather than adopting the imperial observance wholesale. The Dunmer approach to gift-giving during the New Life Festival reflects their culture's emphasis on family relationships and ancestral connections, with presents often taking the form of items that honor deceased relatives or strengthen bonds between living family members. These gifts frequently include carefully crafted replicas of ancestral weapons, jewelry that incorporates stones or metals from family burial sites, and scrolls containing genealogical information or family histories that preserve important cultural knowledge. The exchange of such gifts occurs during ceremonies conducted at family shrines, where the presence of ancestral spirits supposedly blesses the new relationships and commitments being established. The integration of New Life Festival celebrations with traditional Dunmer ancestor worship creates unique ceremonial forms that have no equivalent in other provinces. Families conduct special communion rituals with their ancestral spirits during the festival period, seeking guidance for the coming year, while offering reports on their activities and achievements during the year just ending. These ceremonies often include the preparation of special foods that were favored by deceased family members, creating symbolic meals that supposedly nourish both the living participants and the ancestral spirits who continue to influence family welfare. The High Elves of Somerset have transformed the New Life Festival into an elaborate display of cultural sophistication that emphasizes their intellectual achievements and artistic accomplishments, while maintaining the festival's essential themes of renewal and community celebration. The Altmer version of the festival features competitions in various scholarly and artistic disciplines, with participants demonstrating their mastery of subjects ranging from advanced magical theory to the composition of mathematical poetry. These competitions serve both entertainment and educational purposes, providing opportunities for intellectual exchange while reinforcing the Altmer cultural emphasis on learning and refinement. The gift exchanges that characterize Altmer New Life celebrations typically involve items that demonstrate the giver's intellectual or artistic capabilities, including handwritten books containing original research or literary works, magical devices that showcase innovative enchantment techniques, and artistic creations that reflect the highest levels of aesthetic sophistication. The presentation of these gifts follows elaborate protocols that ensure appropriate recognition of their cultural and intellectual value while maintaining the social hierarchies that define Altmer society. Recipients are expected to demonstrate their appreciation through formal responses that acknowledge both the gift's intrinsic worth and its significance as a symbol of the relationship between giver and receiver. The religious observances that accompany Altmer New Life celebrations incorporate complex theological discussions and philosophical debates that explore the festival's deeper meanings, while demonstrating the participants' intellectual sophistication. These religious activities often take the form of formal symposiums, where scholars present papers on topics related to the nature of time, the significance of calendrical transitions, and the proper relationship between divine and mortal realms. The discussions that follow these presentations can continue for hours, with participants engaging in detailed analyses of theological and philosophical questions that reflect the Altmer approach to religious observance through intellectual inquiry. Trade-related ceremonies that have developed along Tamriel's major commercial routes create additional opportunities for cross-cultural exchange, while establishing protocols that facilitate peaceful commerce between peoples with significantly different customs and values. These ceremonies, which typically occur at major trading centers and border crossings, serve both practical and symbolic functions by reducing tensions between different cultural groups, while providing formal mechanisms for resolving disputes that might otherwise escalate into broader conflicts. The caravan blessing ceremonies conducted at the beginning of major trade expeditions have evolved to incorporate elements from multiple religious traditions, creating syncretic rituals that seek protection from the various deities worshipped by the diverse groups involved in long-distance commerce. These ceremonies typically begin with prayers offered according to the religious traditions of the caravan's primary sponsors, followed by additional invocations that acknowledge the spiritual beliefs of other participants and the peoples whose territories the caravan will traverse during its journey. The practical aspects of these blessing ceremonies include the formal registration of caravan members, the documentation of goods being transported, and the establishment of agreements regarding the division of responsibilities and profits among the various participants. These administrative activities are integrated with the religious observances to create comprehensive ceremonies that address both the spiritual and practical requirements for successful long-distance trade. The resulting documentation serves legal functions, while the religious elements supposedly provide supernatural protection against the various dangers that threaten commercial expeditions. The protocols governing inter-provincial commerce have evolved through centuries of trial and error, creating sophisticated systems that accommodate the different legal traditions, cultural expectations, and business practices found throughout Tamriel. These protocols typically include standardized procedures for contract negotiation, dispute resolution, and the verification of goods quality and authenticity. The development of these standards requires ongoing cooperation between merchant organizations, government officials, and religious authorities from different provinces, creating networks of professional relationships that transcend political boundaries while facilitating peaceful commercial exchange. The enforcement of commercial protocols relies heavily on the reputation systems that have developed within merchant communities, where individuals and organizations build trust through consistent adherence to established standards while facing social and economic sanctions for violations of accepted practices. These reputation systems operate across provincial boundaries, allowing merchants to establish credibility in foreign markets while providing mechanisms for sharing information about unreliable trading partners. The most successful merchants invest considerable effort in maintaining their reputations while building networks of relationships that provide access to opportunities and protection against various commercial risks. The seasonal trading festivals that occur at major commercial centers throughout Tamriel create opportunities for large-scale cultural exchange, while providing venues for the negotiation of major commercial agreements and the introduction of new products and technologies. These festivals typically coincide with optimal travel conditions and agricultural cycles, maximizing the number of participants while ensuring adequate supplies of food and other necessities for large gatherings. The organization of these events requires extensive coordination between local authorities, merchant organizations, and the various cultural and religious groups that participate in the celebrations. The shared religious observances honoring the 9 divines create additional opportunities for cross-cultural interaction, while demonstrating the unifying potential of common spiritual beliefs despite significant differences in cultural practices and political allegiances. The worship of Akatosh, Dibella, Arche, Zenithar, Stendar, Mara, Kainareth, Julianos, and Talos provides a theological framework that transcends provincial boundaries while allowing for significant variation in ceremonial forms and interpretational emphasis. The Festival of Akatosh, celebrated throughout the Empire during the height of summer, demonstrates how shared religious observances can maintain common elements while adapting to local conditions and cultural preferences. In Cyrodiil, the festival features elaborate processions through major cities, with participants wearing the golden and red colors associated with the dragon god of time, while carrying banners that display various representations of draconic imagery. The processions follow predetermined routes that connect temples, government buildings, and historical sites significant to imperial history, creating comprehensive celebrations that reinforce both religious devotion and political loyalty. The Nordic version of the Akatosh festival incorporates elements that reflect their cultural emphasis on dragons and their historical significance within Nordic mythology and religion. The celebrations often include the display of ancient dragon bones and artifacts recovered from Nordic burial sites, creating connections between the imperial deity and the traditional Nordic understanding of dragons as powerful supernatural beings worthy of both fear and respect. The ceremonies typically occur in locations that have historical associations with dragon activity, including ancient burial mounds and the sites of legendary battles between Nordic heroes and draconic adversaries. The Redguard interpretation of Akatosh worship emphasizes the deity's role as the divine force that governs the passage of time and the succession of generations, connecting the imperial god to traditional Yakutan concepts regarding the cyclical nature of existence and the importance of maintaining proper relationships with ancestral spirits. The Redguard ceremonies often include the recitation of genealogies that trace family lineages back through multiple generations, creating connections between contemporary worshippers and their ancestors, while acknowledging Akatosh's role in maintaining the continuity of family traditions and cultural identity. The worship of Dibella creates opportunities for artistic and cultural exchange, as different provinces share their interpretations of beauty, creativity, and artistic expression, while maintaining their distinctive aesthetic traditions. The Breton approach to Dibella worship emphasizes the goddess's role in inspiring artistic creation and romantic love, with festivals that feature competitions in various artistic disciplines, alongside celebrations of marriage and courtship. These events often attract participants from other provinces who come to observe Breton artistic techniques while sharing their own cultural traditions in return. The Khajiit interpretation of Dibella worship incorporates the goddess into their existing understanding of lunar influences on beauty, creativity, and emotional expression. The Khajiit ceremonies often coincide with specific lunar phases that supposedly enhance artistic inspiration while providing optimal conditions for the creation of beautiful objects and the performance of traditional arts. These celebrations frequently feature the display and exchange of fine crafts, musical performances, and storytelling that demonstrate the Khajiit mastery of various artistic forms while honoring Dibella's role in inspiring creative expression. The evolution of cultural exchange through conquest, trade, and diplomacy has created complex patterns of influence and adaptation that continue to shape the development of traditions throughout Tamriel. The imperial conquest of various provinces introduced Cyrodiilic customs and institutions, while simultaneously exposing imperial culture to foreign influences that have gradually modified traditional practices and beliefs. This process of mutual influence has accelerated during periods of intensive trade and diplomatic contact, while slowing during times of political conflict and cultural isolation. The spread of literacy and formal education throughout the empire has facilitated the transmission of cultural knowledge while creating opportunities for the systematic study and comparison of different traditional practices. Imperial schools and universities attract students from throughout Tamriel, creating environments where young people from different provinces interact while learning about both imperial and foreign cultures. These educational institutions serve as centers for cultural synthesis, where new traditions emerge from the combination of different provincial practices with imperial institutional frameworks. The role of the imperial bureaucracy in standardizing administrative practices has created additional mechanisms for cultural transmission while establishing common procedures that facilitate cooperation between different provincial governments. The training of provincial administrators in imperial methods introduces Cyrodiilic approaches to governance while requiring imperial officials to understand and accommodate local customs and expectations. This administrative integration has produced hybrid governmental forms that combine imperial efficiency with provincial cultural sensitivity. The military service that brings together soldiers from different provinces creates particularly intensive opportunities for cultural exchange, as individuals from diverse backgrounds must cooperate closely while facing shared dangers and challenges. The Imperial Legion's policy of mixing provincial recruits within individual units ensures that soldiers gain direct experience with foreign customs while developing personal relationships that transcend cultural boundaries. These military connections often persist after service ends, creating networks of veterans who maintain cross-cultural friendships and business relationships throughout their lives. The influence of intermarriage between members of different provincial cultures has created families that actively maintain multiple cultural traditions while developing new practices that reflect their mixed heritage. These families often serve as bridges between different communities, facilitating communication and understanding while demonstrating the practical possibilities for cultural synthesis and cooperation. The children of such marriages frequently become cultural interpreters who possess intimate knowledge of multiple traditions while developing unique perspectives that contribute to ongoing cultural evolution. The gradual development of common commercial practices and legal standards has created additional frameworks for cultural interaction while establishing shared expectations that facilitate peaceful coexistence despite significant differences in traditional customs and values. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency has simplified trade relationships while reducing opportunities for misunderstandings and disputes that might escalate into broader conflicts. These practical accommodations often lead to deeper cultural understanding, as people who initially interact for purely commercial reasons develop appreciation for foreign customs and perspectives. As Tamriel continues to evolve under imperial rule, these processes of cultural exchange and adaptation ensure that the continent's rich diversity of traditions will continue to flourish, while gradually creating new forms of shared identity that transcend provincial boundaries. The festivals and customs that have emerged from centuries of interaction between different cultures demonstrate both the resilience of traditional practices and the creative potential that results from peaceful cultural exchange. These traditions serve as living testimony to the possibility of maintaining cultural distinctiveness while participating in larger communities that encompass multiple peoples and ways of life, creating a continental civilization that draws strength from its diversity while finding unity in shared experiences and common aspirations. The future of Tamriel's cultural traditions will likely continue to reflect this dynamic balance between preservation and adaptation, as each generation of citizens inherits the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors, while facing new challenges that require creative responses and innovative solutions. The festivals and customs that define provincial identities will undoubtedly continue to evolve, but their essential functions of strengthening community bonds, preserving cultural knowledge, and providing meaning and purpose to individual lives will remain constant features of civilized existence throughout the empire and beyond.